It was a short week later that Ben and Thera were flying through the skies. One of them tensed in fear as the other only seemed tired. "I still say this is insane," Thera told him. How many times she'd brought her concerns up being impossible to remember. The chances of leveling your mind skills are so far above your chances of awakening Connect. I can't understand why you'd be willing to risk that after all the pain you've gone through in the past few months. Because the potential rewards far outweigh the risks. Besides, even if I do level the skills, my headache's gone and my minds can't split again if they're stuck at the 9th level. Sure. Except you'll just get it again for who knows how many months this time? From Hilori's guess, probably just a couple. It was the best estimate the goddess could make when he'd brought up the concern himself, comparing what he'd just gone through against how much his soul had changed to lower some of the burden it was under, and it was a risk he was more than willing to take for just what it could mean. Awakening it might mean I could make legendary items, Thera. You can't deny just how useful that would be to the world as a whole. The fact that I can't is the only reason I'm taking you out here. Just consider yourself lucky that I'm ignoring your real reason. I have no clue what you're talking about, he said innocently, not fooling his girlfriend in the slightest. Please, your eyes basically glow when you start thinking about what you could do after the skill awakens. I'm not doubting you want to make some legendary items. I'm just doubting it's coming from a place that's looking at the world instead of just yourself. He gave a small laugh as she could only shake her head. As much as she thought things would end terribly, it was unfortunately worth the risk. She just wished he could seem a little hesitant about it. Still, it wasn't long before they landed, arriving at the edge of town and driving through, at first receiving suspicious looks from the locals, right up until they recognized them as the mood changed to the positive. Happy smiles going around as they got waves from those they passed before getting to their first destination, the house of Fontesh. It was only the second after he got off the cart, trying to make it to the door to say hello, that something small all but flew from the side of the building, a young dryad seeming to try and tackle him to the ground in her haste, instead just wrapping her arms around him. "Ben!" Dallaire yelled out, more than thrilled with the surprise visit. "You should have visited sooner." "Ha, sorry. You'd be shocked at how crazy things had been, but it's great to see you," he told her happily, picking her up and sitting her on his shoulders. "It's only been what? Couple years? How did you grow so much?" "A lot can happen in a couple years," Fontesh said, walking out from the same area Dallaire had run. "Thera, it's nice to see you again. And Ben, welcome back from the dead. I wish you'd visited sooner. Dallaire was a mess when we got the news." "I was not," she yelled out before taking a far glummer tone. "But you should have done more than just sending a letter, you know." Sorry, you're right. But hopefully we'll be here for a couple weeks if Hentath is feeling agreeable." Fontesh gave him a funny look. "What do you need her agreeing to?" A fair bit honestly. Might be easier if you come while we talk to her. And assuming she says yes, is there any chance we could rent a room while we're here? After all you've done for the village, of course you can stay. Honestly, everyone was pleased to find out you lived after what Sakhel told us, so seeing you might just put her in a good enough mood to be agreeable. "So you really did live," Hentath said as soon as she opened the door, trying to look as firm as usual but not able to completely keep the smile from touching her lips. "Should have known anyone who's as much of a pain as you seem to want to be wouldn't go out so easily. And it's great to see you too, Hentath. Glad I'm alive to keep being a pain to everyone around me. I feel like I need to point out that if you didn't insist on being so blatantly antagonistic at times, then you'd probably get in a lot less trouble," Thera muttered. Ignoring both of them, Ben instead focused on the village elder, bowing his head as he did. "So anyway, there's something I'm hoping you'd be willing to agree to. Two somethings really, and before you say no, at least hear me out." "All right then." Hentath, Dallaire, and Fontesh were all admittedly curious about what brought him out there with the invasion so close on their heels. They could have imagined him wanting to hide away there since they were blissfully far from any of the invasion points, but they would have agreed to that readily, and it wasn't the impression he was giving off. "Okay, so the first thing I was hoping for was to get more wood from you all, and the second was that I was hoping you'd let me talk to your trees." "Absolutely not. At least let me finish. The last time you spoke to the trees, the forest thought you were dying. and giving out those 3 branches before was as thanks for your work. I don't know how much you need, but we sure as hell aren't cutting down any trees for you. And I'm not asking you to, he told her, holding up his hands in a show of innocence. I will take literally anything that's come down on its own, and I'm more than willing to pay well for everything. Plus trade too if you'll join me at my cart. I guarantee that you'll be more than satisfied with what I'm offering. Despite herself, Hentath couldn't help but be curious. She'd seen the sort of work he could do when he had literally nothing and couldn't help but acknowledge his past skill. Even without knowing how much he'd grown, she couldn't help but wonder just what he'd made to trade. The 5 of them walked over as Ben started unloading boxes from the back, straining under the weight of some as he did before opening them one by one. The first thing they saw was toys, and lots of them. Their condition was far better than what a lot of the village's children currently got to enjoy, even considering that Ben had taken the time to mail some on occasion after he'd last left. Delaire's eyes lit up seeing them, though Hedith was far from impressed. You're going to have to do better than that. Hey, these are what I'm giving regardless of if you agree or not because I'm the absolute sweetest. Delaire, make sure you distribute them all equally with your friends. Okay? Okay, she yelled out, already rummaging through the box of them as he laughed and opened the next, revealing a pile of quartz sheets that all but Thera looked at curiously. And this is another type of game. Delaire, I think you'll get a kick out of this, so why don't you and your mom both grab an end and start running your mana through it? It was obvious how instantly less impressed she was from looking at it, seeing nothing but a sheet of stone, but did as she was asked, as not only she, but Fontesh as well became at first interested and then enthralled by the simple game of Pong he'd put on it to be played, easily figuring out the goal as they went. By the end, even Hentath seemed interested as Ben couldn't keep himself from grinning. So I made about 30 different games and 3 copies of each for you all to enjoy. Obviously, you'll all need to decide for yourselves how the village is going to split or share them, but I guarantee hours of entertainment out of them. They're getting pretty rave reviews, and making me even richer. He didn't know if it was just the one arcade Jake had found that was helping to popularize them, or if other places had done similar things. All he could say for sure was that people were making and selling them for a decent price, letting him rake in profit atop all of his other agreements and patents. Still, it seemed Hentath was going to stand firm. I'll admit it's interesting, but still no, she told him, ignoring the instant disappointment of both Delaire and Fontesh. The safety of our forest isn't worth some games when it's directly tied to our species' survival. And I still have more, so let me finish, he said as he opened the next couple crates, coming out with something far more underwhelming compared to the last 2. With Fontesh and Delaire unable to hide their disappointment. Dirt. Technically mulch, he corrected. But that's not the important part. What is important is this is special mulch that can massively speed up a plant's growth while improving its overall health, and is Jagal approved. That caught her attention, and in a big way too. She didn't doubt his words given he represented a god himself, and caring for their forest was a huge necessity for them as they slowly worked to expand their grove. If that could help, then at the very least it actually would be worth the trade for any fallen wood they could gather, though she still wasn't sure about letting him talk to the trees and was about to say as much right up until he opened the next crate. And in a similar vein we have these, he said, holding up what looked like metallic collars of various sizes, some small, while others were big enough that none of them wanted to see the sorts of creatures that could wear them. I still need to set up the enchantments on them, but this is another thing I've already proven works. What we have here are 100 items that once finished will be able to supply a constant source of plant magic aimed at making whatever trees they're on grow. Really hoping you like these, 'cause they're all made with some mithril and white mana crystal, and assuming you take them you probably shouldn't let anyone outside of your village know they exist. Hentath couldn't stop her jaw from hanging open as she understood what he was offering. Aside from the fact that it represented a fortune in materials, that meant 100 trees they wouldn't need to work on growing themselves, at most only needing to do a bit of guiding as they instead focused on other ones. It was enough to make her almost instantly agree to what he wanted, but much like Ben, she was the sort who wanted to get all she could out of someone, so instead she turned, focusing on the remaining crates. And the last 2? Okay, so this one is also unfinished and is another thing you really can't tell outsiders about because it would be a pain for me. I'm assuming you've heard about the enhancement potions going around. I have no idea what you're talking about. Right, isolated village, only talks to a couple trusted merchants, I guess that tracks. Okay, so someone, well me, discovered a way to make potions that can permanently increase all of a person's attributes by 3. I'll make a potion for every member of the village, but the final ingredient I need is the wood. Admittedly, it didn't take much, but it was the limiting factor by a significant margin. Still, sharing the potions with about 100 people wouldn't be bad. His tree was growing more fruit than he and the ones he was already sharing with could ever possibly need, and he'd saved up a healthy stock of them as he wondered just what to put them towards. He thought it was a good deal, and right up until then he thought he had her. But the look in the elder's eyes changed from temptation to fear as she processed what he said. If a potion like that existed, then people would want them, plain and simple. She could only envision a future where people got their hands on the recipe and stormed their woods to take what they could. I feel like I've just been told my species is doomed, she muttered, rubbing her temples as she did as Ben caught on to the problem. I mean, from the sounds of it, every species is doomed, but yours isn't going to be particularly impacted by this discovery, I promise. Outside of myself, the recipe is being monopolized by the gods, and it just so happens that they have a stranglehold on all of the alternative ingredients that could be used instead of the wood. Either way, nobody but me is going to try and get it from you, and if after all of this you're still against it, then I'll just leave, I promise. He tried to show all of the sincerity he could, and Hentath couldn't help but believe him. Even if he had been a bit much, in his last visit to the village, he'd been nothing but helpful. As it was, she found herself completely willing to accommodate his need for the wood. But all of that left one thing unexplained. Alright, as things are, I guess I can't refuse the idea of the trade if it just means gathering our fallen branches for you, but no part of this explains why you need to talk to the trees. Ah, fair. I guess I really do need to elaborate on that. When I did last time, I felt the skill I'd been using being pressed from the nature of your grove, and even then I hadn't been able to interact with it to my full potential, but this time I think I might be able to. The reason I want to spend a couple weeks on it, if you'll let me, is to see if it's enough to awaken my skill. It was only Delaire in her youth who couldn't fully appreciate what he was talking about trying. But Fontesh and Hentath couldn't help but be shocked as the elder ended up agreeing to both things he was looking for. She was fully capable of understanding the value of an awakened skill holder, and if he genuinely thought it might get him there, then given the state of the world, she didn't have it in her to deny him. Not when every bit of strength that could be gained needed to be taken. With agreement received, Ben wasted no time getting to the nitty-gritty of what he needed to have to finish up the plant collars while he waited for the wood to be collected. So who in the village would you say has the highest level of plant magic? Me and one other have the skill at the 8th level. Why? Just going to need your hand for a moment, he told her, taking it and opening the connection, unable to keep himself from peeking to see if she had any other interesting skills before copying the soul magic she possessed to a ring. Looking at it with his limited analysis, he couldn't help but smile to see he was able to copy the totality of the skill, unlike in the past where his attempt had left him getting only the 3rd level when the 5th was available. It was clear proof that his connect and enchanting had grown, even if he still wanted to go farther. Definitely going to need to update the enchantments on my possessed tree and Frederick's pot now that I've got this, but for the time being, let's get started. Along with his new and improved plant magic ring, he also slipped on a 7th level minor soul magic one he'd made while he was with the demi-demons and picked up one of the tree collars he needed to finish, blending the 2 enchantments along with the highest level of earth, water, and life magic he had access to in an effort to ensure it would have the most powerful effect it could as he quickly finished it, putting it to the side and starting the next as he waited. Seeing he would be working on it for a while, Hentath went to rally more people to gather wood for him while Fontesh patted her daughter's head before leaving with a few words, off to finish some chores. It was only Delaire who stayed with him and Thera, staring intently at what he was doing with her weak mana sense as he did his best to speed through everything, the toys he'd brought with him forgetting in favor of seeing what he could do. Curious? He asked with a grin, happy the child seemed interested in his work and getting a surprising response in return. Nobody here was able to teach me how to, so I gotta learn now that you're here, she told him with a bright smile, eager to figure out the secret of it to try herself but still managing to catch him off guard. You want to learn how to enchant? Yeah. Even though I haven't gotten the skill yet, I've still been working really hard, see? As she said that, she pulled out her card. Her chest puffed out with pride as she held it out to him to take a look as his eyes skimmed over it. A second surprise coming to him as he did. You have the Zeroth level of crafting? Yep, she told him confidently, before taking a change to the bashful. I need it if I'm going to be your apprentice one day. I did put out that offer when I left last time, didn't I? Thera was looking at him curiously, wondering just how he would respond as he focused on the girl, wanting to probe her interest. He wasn't just going to dismiss her desire. If she not only remembered that casual offer but had been working hard enough to get the crafting skill, then she must have felt serious about it. But it seemed far outside what he would have expected her future to hold. Well, I can help you try to get enchanting while I'm here, but first, would you mind telling me why you want to be a craftsman? 'Cause it makes people happy, she said brightly. I want to do that too. And it was really fun helping you while you were here before too. Well, I'm not sure about that first bit, but if she enjoys it, then that's the most important part, since she's looking to her future. If she's planning on staying in her village as she grows up too, then having someone with the crafting skill would be ideal. Even if it wasn't as specialized as something like smithing or enchanting, that only really mattered in bigger towns and cities where people had a larger variety of choice that gave them the liberty to get the best they could. In a remote place like the Dryad Village, though, it would be helpful for everyone to have a jack of all trades, even if that meant a bit of a drop in quality. Plus, as long as she gets her level high enough, then that difference won't really matter, will it? Alright, in that case, do you have any paper around? I'll teach you a bit while I'm here, but I'll also make you some notes you can read over and practice with after I leave again. I'll check, she yelled as she ran off, Thera taking a seat beside him as she did. Are you really going to take her as an apprentice? She asked, filled with curiosity at the exchange she watched. It was a question that got her a shrug. I did offer, even if I didn't really expect her to want to take me up on it. And it looks like she's been working hard, so why not? It's not like I'll be doing it now, but maybe in 3 or 4 years, if she's still interested and we aren't all dead, it could be fun. Besides, it's not like it's going to be hard to put a single mind on giving her some lessons while I'm here. Right? Ha! I just thought you'd take after my uncle on the matter of training others, she teased. I'll have you know Falk loves me no matter how much he doesn't want to show it. Besides, it would probably be different if it was some random off the street, but she's a good kid. Plus, I can now say no to anyone else who asks on the grounds that I already have one. He hadn't gotten any requests to take on apprentices yet, only able to assume that some of the nations who wanted him probably wanted him to train their people as well, but he had no intention of taking on anyone like that. Dallaire was different though. He liked the reasons she gave for wanting to be a craftsman, and he thought she was a good kid. Sure, she was young enough that her dreams and entire personality could change by the time she'd be old enough to start training, but then that was a problem for the future. Let's see, he muttered to himself as he kept going through his enchantments. It looks like she's an apprentice mage right now, so I can work on writing up a few potential training plans for her depending on what she takes next, be it apprentice craftsman or true mage, and I think with just a bit of work I can help her learn the enchanting skill before I leave. Oh, and I should also ask how long she's had the crafting skill for. If it's been over a year and she's been practicing, I'm sure I can get her to the first level of it while I'm here. Yeah, let's do that. It would let her see what sort of effort has to go into training too, so it might be better for her to learn early on. Ben, if you work her anywhere near as hard as you work yourself, you're going to scare the poor girl off. I'm not planning on doing anything extreme, don't worry, he said in his defense, not getting an ounce of belief back. I got to see and hear about how hard you trained the demi-demons, Ben. Only adults. Dallaire's what? 9 now? I'm not going to give her a level of work that would scare her off. I just want to let her see the breadth that crafting has to offer. With alchemy at the top of the menu. There were a couple things about making the god potions that he could leave to her so long as he kept an eye on things, and from there more plans came together in his head as she eventually came back with papers in hand before Hentath returned with the wood. And from there they could finally get started. After another hour of enchanting, he finally finished all of the tree collars and let himself get set up for potion making, pulling out everything he'd brought for the act as he pulled out a mortar and pestle to show to Dallaire. "All right. Are you ready to attempt some alchemy?" "Yeah." "Great. Now since these potions are important, I'm going to just have you do some of the simpler stuff, with one of the main things involving using the wood everyone just brought back." He now had a pile of far more than the 3 branches he'd first been gifted ready to go, and with a sharp knife he began cutting off a chunk of one, tossing it in a pot with some water before placing it over a fire, the goal being to have it absorb what it could and soften up, letting them move on to the next stage of grinding it into a paste. As they waited, he spoke with the girl about the process, trying to explain what they'd be doing as simply as he could for her sake, along with telling her about the potential that alchemic knowledge contained, not just the potions it could be used for but also its applications in smithing, and how it could be used to let items get even more out of certain affinities of enchantments. If she's going to be my apprentice one day, I'm going to need her to get connect. What do you say, Myriad? Feeling generous? No, but if I can make up the faith you'd lose on it, would you do it? Maybe it would be easier to just hire Zandale. It was something to worry about in the future, but not a priority. She had her low plant magic she could enchant with after all, and even if it wouldn't be as handy as other branches, there were still plenty of enchantments he could think of that he could get her to practice with once she got the skill. I guess that means I'm writing down all of the enchantments I can think of too, so I might need to ask Thera to pick up some paper while she's in the city. Combining that with training details for each crafting discipline I'm competent in, I'd probably be using the town's entire supply. It's an issue of consent. I put out the offer to train her, so I do need to take responsibility for that. You made the request of taking me as a believer without explaining that would leave me as your apostle, meaning you need to deal with my casual attitude about it. He heard a humph from his god, but he ignored it. The wood was done, so he carefully moved it from the pot to his mortar, showing Dallaire what he was doing to break it down before giving her a chance to try, only taking over again at the end as she got tired and to ensure it would be perfect for their needs. From there, he didn't actually have much more for her to do. All of the other ingredients had been prepared before he'd arrived. The thought he might be teaching someone any alchemy not even a glimmer in his eye at the time, so instead he explained why he was combining them as he went, what purpose each ingredient served, and why it needed to be added at different stages of the process while he stirred it all until it was finally complete, the only thing remaining being to use it. "All right, I guess we're going to have to gather everyone in the village first. But for the time being, since you helped with making it, why don't you be the first to give it a try?" He told her as he divvied out the portion she'd need to see the full effects of what they made and watched as she hesitantly took it, trying to contain her excitement as she took a sip. "Wow, it's tasty." Yeah, it is. Always nice when things work out that way, isn't it? When you finish up, do you want to ask Hentath to gather everyone and we can get to sharing it?" "All right." Eager to get the rest of the town to try what she'd helped with, she quickly finished the potion and ran off to spread the word, leaving just him and Thera as Myriad spoke in his head. "What? Interesting. I'm already growing more fruit than I can use, and that's before I'm updating the enchantment with my new plant magic ring. I should be able to keep sending more potions to the village with the extras in exchange for a constant supply of wood to go along with it. I'll bring up the idea with Hentath later." Sure, but it was interesting musing. Consider it an investment for the future anyway. If the world survives, then it wouldn't be a bad thing to have some powerful plant mages, right? Heck, even in the next year or two, it could be valuable to help them grow as powerful as possible in case there's any food insecurities. I'd say that would make preparing for the invasion more than worth it. As the potions were distributed throughout town, a subtlety that Ben had at first missed began to rear its ugly head. An edge of fear, not clear on each villager at all times, but always around a few of them. The same fear that had gripped the world as the days kept on counting down. Only 51 days left. It was on everyone's minds to one extent or another, the inescapable fact that odds were good that in a few short years they'd all be dead, with the strain that came with that knowledge not so easy to hide. Still, it seemed that the adults around were trying not to show it, with no desire to scare the children with something that couldn't be changed, and neither Ben nor Thera had any intention of talking about it either. Both Falk and Sonia would be at Craftsman's Tower by the time there'd be only 30 days left, with Ben and Thera joining them no matter how things turned out with his attempt in the woods, all of them needing to be ready for whatever part they could play. and then I get to worry about losing my second life by idiotically standing at an invasion point when I don't even have to. Hey, I guess on the plus side I'll get to see whatever sort of magic superweapon Falk helped to build. Maybe if I ask real nicely they'll let me look at the designs a little. That could happen, right? He got no answer. All of the gods who would spend time in his head busy with other things with the end of the world so close as he held in a sigh, mingling with the dryads he hadn't seen in so long as they all tried to pretend that things were okay. All right, since I'm here let me handle dinner, he told Fontesh as they got back to her home. Since Dallaire was showing off that she got the crafting skill, does she have any practice with it? A little, Fontesh said with a smile, rubbing her daughter's head as she did. When you left she was so insistent on trying to get it, so we got her to balance out learning a bit of cooking, sewing, and art with a few of the villagers that could help her with that. Awesome. Well, while I'm around, why don't I try and help her brush up a bit on that aspect too, if that sounds good? The young girl was nodding enthusiastically while her mother only laughed. If she wants to learn, then I'm not going to stop her. Teach her well enough that she can cover the meals, and that will leave me some time for some other things too. Ha, sounds good. And you don't mind her using a knife, do you? I'll teach her the basic bits of safety while I'm here. But if you're cool with it, that would mean I could also teach her a bit of wood carving too. It's another aspect of crafting, so it would be good practice, especially since you have so many trees around to take advantage of. Plus, if we can get her enchanting before I leave, it would give her something to practice making enchantments on too. That's fine, she agreed easily enough before focusing on her daughter. But Dallaire, if Ben is going to take some of the time he's here to teach you, then you need to put your all into learning, understood? He's already trying something plenty hard on his own, so you can't be distracting him when he needs to put as much effort into his goal as he can. Yes, Mom. Fontesh gave her a smile. She appreciated just how extremely difficult it was to awaken a skill, and she didn't want to get in the way of Ben's original goal going out there. But since he seemed happy enough to indulge her daughter, then she was happy to let him. All right, he said confidently, rustling the girl's hair. Let's get started. First things first is proper knife safety. I'll show you how to cut the vegetables for dinner, and while we're cooking I'll try and guide you. Maybe we can talk about how flavors can be chosen to complement each other too. Hope you're ready for this, kiddo, 'cause now that I've decided to, I'll be making you learn as much as you can in the weeks I'm here. He said it with a smile, and in response, Dallaire's eyes lit up with excitement, ready to use the time to learn all she could. After the meal, Ben spent a couple hours talking to the girl as Fontesh and Thera stood by, near enough to listen but less enthralled by the finer points of crafting and enchanting to want to get involved in the talk, instead chatting about what had gone on in the time since they'd seen one another, right up until it was time to head to bed. They said their goodnights as Ben and Thera moved to the same room they'd stayed in during their last visit, as they looked at the shared bed before Ben focused on his girlfriend's face. You're blushing. I am not, she firmly told him, slapping his arm as she looked away. Just step outside and let me change. He did exactly as he was asked, giving her a few minutes before coming back and finding her already tucked in. A golden glow still spread across her cheeks. It was a sight that had shown up more and more recently as they would part for the night, and he could only wonder what was going on through her head, paying her the courtesy of not just checking without her permission, no matter how curious it might have left him. Want me to sleep on the ground? Just get in here already, you idiot. It was all the invitation he needed as he went to lie down, wrapping an arm around her as he did. Thanks again for coming all the way out here with me. PFFF. If I didn't, then who knows what would happen to you? Just don't get yourself attacked while I'm out visiting the surrounding towns. Thera still wanted to offer her services as a healer after all. The month he planned on being there to train was no short stretch of time by any means, and she fully intended on doing her best to get as many levels to her job as she could before things went downhill. I'll do my best. Also, would you mind picking up a few things for me while you're going around? I'm going to need a lot more paper for notes, and getting a few tools for Dallaire to use would be handy for her to practice with after I leave. It was as he was saying it that a small laugh couldn't help but escape Thera as she leaned in closer. You're like a father who wants to spoil his daughter. Hey, I'm not that old. At least say a brother spoiling his little sister. MMH, no. The feeling you're giving is definitely that of a dad who's excited his daughter is showing an interest in what he does. You seem more interested in helping her right now than you are trying to push your connect over the edge. Thinking of how to train someone is just more stimulating, he said in his defense. For connect, I just need to link up with the forest and hope it doesn't make my brain explode. For training, I need to consider the best way to help her grow based on my own experiences while also taking the resources she has available into account. It is a perfectly normal level of interest. Ha, sure. Sure, if you say so, she told him, not believing him for a second. It didn't take knowing him personally to see how much he'd enjoyed the bit of time he'd already spent on teaching her. And Dallaire seemed like she was determined to live up to her promise with her mother to be an attentive student. If they survived up to the third wave and that really managed to be the end of things like so many people desperately wanted to hope, there was a very possible chance that Ben would be ending up with an apprentice of his own. She couldn't help but imagine that future. If Dallaire was going to become Ben's apprentice, then that would mean the girl would have to move to Stonewall, but that seemed like it could be hard on her in its own way. Sure, she'd have family in the form of Sakhel present, but Thera knew that she would take more distant quests, as well as have to go out to preach as the Oracle of Myriad. Given that, it really would make more sense for Dallaire to be staying with her and Ben instead as she let herself imagine it. There wouldn't be enough room in her aunt's home to take someone in, but Ben did own an entire other house in town, its only issue being the number of death traps he'd built into it. If he took them out, then it would be the perfect place for a family. What am I even thinking? She muttered, shaking her head of the thought as Ben looked at her curiously. Thera, don't worry about it, she told him, leaning in to kiss and looking in his eyes as she did. Hey Ben. Yeah. Do you want to? Actually, don't worry about it. I'm going to sleep. She was close enough that he knew that wasn't true, feeling her heart pound against his chest. But as she laid there quietly, insisting on pretending she'd done as she said, he gave her a soft kiss before closing his eyes and forcing his mind up to his god's realm. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was that it was a full house that night, with each god present intent on yelling at him. Oh no, you bastard, Myriad said first. You go back down there and you ask her to finish what she was going to say. It was just getting good too, Hellori said from atop his god, a snack in her hand and the first example he'd seen of a god eating as Analia was coiled around them both, laughing as she was. It's good to be respectful of those you love, but sometimes it pays off more to push an issue, you know? Now, let them figure things out themselves, Nair told them. Better a bit too respectful than not respectful enough. Besides, it seems like the girl is going to force the matter herself sooner than later. Is there a reason you're all here? Ben asked after it seemed everyone had given their say. Am I interrupting something? Oh no, Analia told him. Hellori let me know it looked like something interesting might happen, so I came to watch. And it sounded fun, so I joined. Nair chimed in. It's important to get breaks every now and then after all, but since it ended on a flat note, I'll be on my way. With those words he vanished, Analia going with him and leaving only the more typical three in the realm. I wonder if I could get some privacy if I enchant my entire room with King of Sacrilege, Ben muttered. If I just try and keep you all from seeing me, then you could probably just focus on Thera. But if I cover a room that might give me that bit of privacy I've been lacking these last few years. Well, except from the Grey. But I'm just going to tell myself they don't watch me too much. It's fine, Myriad said cheerfully. Just act like there's no eyes on you and let whatever's going to happen happen. Why do you seem so happy about the idea of something happening? Oh, I'm just excited for the future is all. The future where we're all going to be dead? No, a completely different part of the future, though admittedly one that will be cancelled out by everyone dying. I wouldn't worry about it. Definitely need to consider enchanting all of Sonia's place with sacrilege. Or maybe I can extend the effects of it to Thera while I'm with her. Another thing to test, I guess. Oh, don't be boring, Hellori told him, tossing some unknowable snack into her mouth. Watching mortals just happens to be fun. Plenty of people have our eyes on them in what little spare time we currently have. If you don't like it, just try to live a less interesting life. Excuse you. I'm trying to live the most boring life I can. It's this reality as a whole that seems to be going against that desire. Then blame the universe for any attention you get, she said with a shrug. Anyway, what are we working on with you tonight? At the peak of his headache, he'd put a rest to training both his language studies, as well as working on examining the summoning spell, but with his minds free of their past pain he had been getting back into it again at full force, trying to make up for the time he'd missed. Both, but let's emphasize the summoning. Also, we're skipping any language from Myriad. It made me gain one level of mental expansion in the past just getting the hang of one of them. I feel like if I start learning a new one on top of it, it'll just make my mind rip itself apart again. Hey, that's fair, Hellori said, both of them ignoring the cube's complaint. In that case, Myriad, would you bring up the summoning spell again? We'll discuss its aspects through the lens of my people's tongues to work on both. Sounds good. There was always so much to do. He needed to awaken Connect, build Onyx a new body, learn all he could about the mysterious summoning spell that had brought him to the world, and try to get a better grasp of how language worked as a whole to take all he could get from the archive, along with so many other smaller tasks. Each felt like enough to take up years of his life on their own, but together it couldn't help but feel overwhelming if he let himself think on it for too long. And now I'm adding a month's worth of training Dallaire onto the list. There really aren't enough hours in the day, but this is all stuff I've chosen for myself. In the end, I just need to do it. As morning came, Ben woke up, only to find Dallaire already at the ready to help him put together breakfast for everyone. Eager to practice what she'd been shown only the night before as he watched from the side. Prepared to step in at a moment's notice but not needing to in the end as the meal came together and the other two joined. It was only after they ate that everyone parted, each of them off to prepare for their own tasks for the day. Thera going off to Hentatha's home, wanting to check if any of the Dryads had any medical issues that they weren't able to take care of themselves, as Ben went into the woods with Dallaire, ready to start his main goal that had brought them there as he stared at the closest tree of the grove. This is it. My last idea. If practicing with these trees for weeks isn't enough to push me over the edge, then I'm out of options. So what are you going to do anyway? Dallaire asked as she watched him lean down against it. Ha! I'm afraid it's not going to be the most visual thing, but I can probably help teach you while I'm doing it too. Want to do me a favor and find me a couple large stones? He only really needed one mind to go to helping Dallaire, and she ran off to fulfill his request as he worked on how he would organize the others. Even if he was taking a risk, he really didn't want to gain a level of parallel thought or mental expansion, and with 31 left he decided on 28 going to the trees as the remaining 3 focused on meditating, hoping that would be enough as he connected to them. As with the last time he did, he felt his mind being assaulted by the sheer force of the woods, all of the trees in the grove linked in their own way, and each of them far more powerful than that standard mind of a plant as he took it all in, feeling them pull back as they noticed not only him, but the strain he was immediately placed under by the power of their massive collective mind. Wait, don't pull away, he thought to the woods, filling the words with feelings to be understood. I've been through worse. I connected to you in the past if you remember me. Give me all you've got, I can take it. He felt hesitation from the plants, but he wasn't willing to give up. Please, the harder it is for me, the better the odds I can grow from this. He tried to attach all of the feelings he could to the thought, his desire to improve himself, the knowledge of all the good it might do, the time limit they were all on, and more than anything his desire. He didn't care if it hurt a bit, he wanted to push beyond his limits, and that feeling made it through. All at once he felt the trees change, no longer pulling back, instead pushing forward as all of the minds he had on the task went to face it head-on. The strain he was feeling from it being close to the pain of the migraines he'd had to deal with for so long, but that was a pain he had practiced dealing with. He wouldn't back down, no matter how many days of it he was going to have to put up with till he reached his goal. Ben! Dallaire yelled as she came back with rocks in hand, seeing his face not hiding all of the pain, along with the sweat dripping down his brow. What happened? Ah, don't worry, he told her, trying to seem reassuring but failing completely in the end. I'm not actually doing as bad as I look. Are you sure? 'Cause you look really, really bad. Ouch. I am. This is just the sort of thing you might have to do if you're feeling desperate to push a skill beyond its limits, he told her. Comparatively, some people have been through a lot worse. Heck, I know a guy who had half of his body eaten while trying to awaken his unarmed combat skill. Worked out for him since he got to meet his wife after. But still, if this works, I'm getting off easy. Though admittedly not as easy as I did for my crafting and enchanting. He thought to himself. Unless you count Galwax's trial as being a necessity for awakening enchanting, then dealing with this is still a lot easier. She still seemed unsure, but as most of his other minds were focused on the woods behind him, the one he was dedicating to training her was focused on the stones in her hands as he held out his own. Here, hand one over and we'll get started trying to teach you how to enchant. It was going to be an interesting experience trying to help her learn it. Since it was his blessed skill, he'd never had to go to the trouble of gaining it himself, but he'd read more than enough books on the topic to know how it was done. The fact they were getting started also proved to be more than interesting enough to her to distract from the look on his face as she handed over the rocks, watching intently as he used his magic to blend them into one before dividing them again into two equal pieces and shaping them into stone knives. They wouldn't be as useful as a properly made metal one, but they would do as a medium for enchanting as he handed one over as Delaire looked on, gripped with excitement. Alright, so the simplest thing an enchanter can do is place the effects of a spell onto an item. Given that you have plant magic, the goal would be to place something that would give this knife an easier time cutting wood when a bit of mana is running through it. Have you ever used your magic to do something like that before? No, but I think I can. There's no rush. Grab a branch and practice it a bit first. If you get a feel for the spell you're trying to apply, then it should give you an easier time to do it. I'll explain what you're trying to do, but unfortunately on this part, I won't be able to give you a decent example. The basics of it was using mana to weaken the connection between wood fibers where they'd meet, while at the same time weakening them elsewhere to cut through them. It wasn't the most common application of plant magic, especially for the Dryads whose main goal was to preserve their woods, but it wasn't unheard of either. Anytime they wanted to expand their grove, they needed to knock down some of the trees that were native to the world they currently lived on instead of their old one, and doing that still took work. It was only after an hour of practice, Delaire taking a few breaks as needed to restore her mana, that she was finally confident that she'd gotten it, smiling broadly as the twig in her hand almost fell apart as the connection between fibers broke down. "Excellent work," he told her. "Now this is where it gets a little harder. You need to prepare the spell, feeling the mana it would use, but instead of activating it, you need to drape it across the knife, attaching the mana to the blade to essentially create a path for other mana to follow when people want to use the item you've made in the future, understand?" Aha! With that, she put on an intense look of focus, directing it at the blade itself as she worked her magic, grabbing onto the stone knife tightly as she tried to do what he'd asked, only to fail immediately. He could see the look of discouragement in her eyes as he reached out to ruffle her hair. "Don't worry about a few failures," he told her, wanting to seem reassuring as he did. "It takes most people weeks or even months to get the hang of enchanting, but you have one benefit that others don't." "I do. Of course, you have me as your teacher," he told her confidently. "As long as I'm working with you, we'll get you the skill before I leave, so don't you worry." Despite her first failure, she'd been fully motivated to continue. But as the hours stretched on, she couldn't help but feel defeat after defeat, even as she kept trying while Ben gently guided her. "I know it can be disappointing, but I can already see you getting closer. Don't worry. I'm sure in just a week or two you'll have it. But that's time I can't use to learn other things," she said with a pout. "Can't you stay longer?" "Ha! I wish I could, kiddo, but I unfortunately have some other work I need to help with. So then I need to get this soon." He could see how hard she was trying, eager to get it as fast as she could, and it did leave him smiling. It was nice to see someone try so hard to learn. There were just always going to be limits to how fast something could be done and not many ways to beat them. Although, haven't I helped someone learn a skill before? He asked himself in a flash of inspiration, remembering what Thera had tried when she'd first gained her life magic. "Here, take my hand for a second and we're gonna try something. Just focus on the feeling. Okay?" She didn't know what he was thinking but did as he'd said while he opened up the connection, blocking out almost all of his minds and the entire forest behind him to keep from harming her, leaving just a part of one to be felt as he used the 8th level plant magic ring on his finger, ever so slowly gathering his mana and placing it on the knife. He didn't work anywhere near as fast as he could, nor did he use any of the more advanced techniques at his disposal. All he did was lay the spell down, making sure he felt every bit of the process as deeply as he could so the feeling could be passed along to his prospective student until he was done and broke the connection. And there's another 9th level skill. Sure would be nice if that was the sound of my dreams coming true instead. He'd understood why it had leveled up, the need to not only hide the mess that was his head, but also the force of an entire forest being a pressing concern to ensure Delaire wasn't hurt. But he couldn't help but feel just a touch of disappointment it wasn't the notification he'd been longing for. Still, that wasn't a priority as he instead focused back on the child with him. All right, try and remember the feeling I just showed you and apply it yourself. I believe in you, and if need be, I can show you again. She didn't even respond. She was too focused on her knife, trying to replicate what Ben had just taught her. And as he watched, he could already see a large amount of improvement. Not to the point that she got it, but enough that it looked like she would have it in a couple days instead of weeks, as her following attempts got closer to what she just felt. It was only as another 3 hours passed, connecting with Ben to be shown again a few more times in that span, that she succeeded in getting the skill. All right, are you feeling better now? Thera asked, trying to gently smile at the child before her as he beamed back brightly. I am. Thank you, Miss Healer. Hearing that, her smile became less forced as her hand started to reach out, only to pull back in the end. With Ben's last 2 levels he'd gotten for his divine enchanting, he'd been able to bring her charm on contact down to 3. So low that the chances of anyone coming under her effects were slim, but still not impossible. Still, it looks like it might not be long now, she thought happily as she finished up with her last patient. Just try to take a bit more care when you're playing, okay? You don't want another broken arm anytime soon. Okay, he told her with a nod, giving one final wave as his family gave her their thanks and carried him out, leaving her alone in the room of the hospital with only one other healer. After going around all of the villages near the Dryads after her first 2 weeks there and treating all she could, it left her without much else to do, so to keep getting the practice she wanted she ventured out further. Going back to the gate city they'd had to travel through and approached their hospital, asking if she might help after showing her card to prove her value, ending with them all but tripping over themselves to accept. They were having the same issue that could be found in Stonewall or anywhere else after all, the shortage of qualified healers making her arrival a godsend. I truly can't thank you enough for your work, Miss Thera, the hospital head, Havok, told her. We should all be able to breathe just a little easier now that we've gotten a break. Don't mention it. Thank you for letting me get some practice here. It was a good experience. It was as she gave a small, grateful bow that she started to leave, having done all she needed to before heading to the door, only for him to try to stop her. And if you're looking for experience, we'd be happy to hire you on, he said hopefully, eager for the chance to recruit an awakened life mage. I assure you we could offer a level of pay and benefits that could meet any standard you might have, and there's always more to treat. Heck, if you're just looking for more experience, then we could import patients through the gate as well. It wasn't an unexpected offer. Many of the towns and villages she'd gone to had put out whatever offers they could as well, each of them wanting to take her in for the scope of her magic in the face of what was to come. But like the rest, she turned him down. I'm sorry, but I already have a home and plans for the invasion, so I can't join you. If you'd like, however, I can be here again next week for another day. I assume you'll get some more patients by then, so I don't mind the work. Well, if you'd be willing to do that, then we'd be more than happy to accept, he told her, getting a smile in return. She'd had to interact with enough people who weren't so willing to accept her rejection. The fact that he had meant he'd gotten a good evaluation in her eyes as a place she'd be willing to go to help again if she was ever passing through. With that they parted, Thera walking down the halls of the building, receiving thanks for her work from the many staff she passed and letting herself feel good. She'd been using her time productively enough, and she couldn't help but enjoy the feeling that came with people appreciating her work without having any mental baggage associated with her. As much as she did like living in Stonewall, enough people there had enough complicated feelings about her that the process of healing them could be an uncomfortable experience for all parties. Out in any random town or city where they didn't know her, The gratitude she received wasn't laced with anything that might taint it. Since it only took me a couple days to finish up at this one, maybe tomorrow I'll go through a different gate to offer my services. She thought happily, right up until something that seemed like it was going to be a pain made its way into her view in the form of two people blocking her path. "Excuse me, would you be Miss Thera?" one asked, already knowing the answer. Nope. She could guess what this was about and didn't want any part of it. But as she tried to walk around them, the other one stepped in her way. "We're here to act as representatives of Nethel. We were just hoping to have a minute of your time to discuss an opportunity with you if you'd let us." Not interested. It was the nation she was currently in, and the opportunity was obvious enough. Like any other, they of course had an army to use, and like every other one, they wanted all of the healers they could get. With word about her activities in the city spreading like wildfire, they of course wanted to bring her in. Assuming she wasn't aligned with anyone since she was going around doing random work, and she wanted no part in whatever deal they were offering. She had no intention of working for a different nation, enjoying the level of freedom she had along with the fact that she'd already made her plans for how she'd handle the coming invasion. And she had no interest in wasting her time on listening to them drone on about whatever offer she wouldn't take. Instead she walked past them, immediately feeling the mistake in that as one grabbed her hand to stop her. In an instant she turned back, swinging the staff held in her other hand and striking the one who'd grabbed her, the metal rod smashing his face as she activated her magic to bring up the stone beneath them, encasing the two before the one she'd hit could fall to the ground or the other could react. "What are you dash? What the hell are you doing?" she yelled back, cutting him off before he could complain. "What makes you think you have any right to touch me? It was your hand. There's no way that excuses this level of violence," he said back, trying to be composed despite his partner seeming to be unconscious beside him. "Sure, except I don't know that idiot's dark resistance, so I don't know if he was just charmed," she told him, fire in her eyes as he understood what happened. "You say you idiots are working for Nethel? So would you rather I put in a complaint about your behavior through the Adventurers Guild for how you're approaching one of their rank 1 adventures? Or maybe I'll go to Analia to complain about the treatment of the Queen's daughter. I suppose I really should do both just to make things clear." She wouldn't normally throw her connections around like that, but they'd just done the one thing that was certain to ruin her mood as the conscious man's eyes changed from a look of understanding to fear. From how she'd wielded earth magic as well as life, it wasn't impossible that she had it as an awakened skill, meaning if she really was associated with the Adventurers Guild, there was the potential for it to be a huge issue. As a global organization, they considered their awakened skill holders as valuable as any nation would, meaning that if Thera wanted to force the issue, she'd have their weight behind them. But worse was what she'd said about Analia. When the two had been sent to approach her, they hadn't had time to look into her background. But if she did have charm, she was certainly a succubus, and given her appearance it wasn't hard to guess what the other half of her heritage might be, adding all the more weight to what she'd just said. Both facts immediately left things far above his pay grade, with the added problem that he and his partner may have just caused an international incident clear on his mind. Analia was the world's foremost supplier of magic materials, and rumors about the current queen's whimful personality weren't uncommon. It was entirely possible that Pelania would stop selling to them if her daughter made a complaint, which had the potential to devastate the land in a time when the metals needed to go to all of the weapons and armor they could. Before he could get a word out, though, as he desperately tried to figure out what to say to calm things down, she held up her staff again, aiming it at the exposed head of his unconscious partner. "Wait, Don T-. I'm just healing him enough that he doesn't die from that," she told him firmly, still looking furious. "He can find another healer to deal with the non-fatal damage when he wakes up. Anyway, you both can wait here and figure out if you want to make any sort of complaint about what happened. I'd love to see the outcome of it if you do." "We won't," he was quick to say. "We take full responsibility for this. We apologize for offending you and have no wish to press the issue. I guess that means I can still come back here in a week like I said I would. Stupid, I should have just said I was affiliated with Analia to begin with to brush them off. I should probably just say that when I go anywhere from now on to save me the trouble." "All right," she told him as she turned around to leave. "Make sure you let the guy with you know what not to do when he wakes up, and I sincerely hope I never meet either of you again. Before you go, I'm sure someone will come to help you before you know it, she said, not looking back. She didn't actually intend to make a big deal of it from either group like she'd threatened, but they'd managed to ruin what had felt like a very nice day for her, so they could wait for some other earth mage to free them of the stone she'd encased them in as she made her way back to the Dryad village. The sun was still up as she made her way back to the village, her flying speed being higher than normal in the face of her emotions that wouldn't go away as she tried to force on a happier look before entering Fontesh's home. Finding her sitting down as still as she could while Dallaire stared at her mother in as much concentration as a child could manage, holding a pen tight in her hand as she tried her best to draw her with Ben by her side, giving pointers and encouragement. It looks great. Now for the shading, just try and give it a lighter touch. Pen and ink isn't the best for this sort of thing, but it can be done. It just takes a bit more care and can be a little harder to fix. Try and look at how the shadows are falling on her face as you do. Cute. Coming into the scene, her mood managed to actually improve a bit beyond the fake smile she was hiding behind as she watched it all, trying not to be a distraction. They'd come specifically to let Ben train, but it seemed more and more his efforts were going to helping Dallaire with her own goals, and Thera could help but find the bits she would see endearing. No matter how he argued it, she couldn't help but think it matched the image in her head of a father trying to make his daughter happy perfectly as she felt her smile become a little more real. All the more so as Dallaire spoke up as she finished her drawing. My crafting leveled up. Hey, that's fantastic, Ben told her, picking the girl up and spinning her around as she laughed. Looks like we'll be making an excellent one of you before you know it. Honestly, thank you so much for spending all of this time with her while you're here, Fontesh told him, getting up to look at the picture her daughter made and loving it. But since you helped her with her enchanting and crafting, maybe she should give you a little break now. He doesn't need a break, Dallaire told her, looking to Ben in the hopes he would take her side as Thera went to make her presence known. He's much happier when he's working himself to death, so I'm sure this much is fine for him. I've never worked myself to death. I always do exactly what I can, he told her, giving her a warm look just from having her back. And this really is fine, don't worry. The fact that my skill didn't awaken after the first day is sign enough it's probably not happening. But there's always the chance it can be pushed to the high form of it if I just keep at it, so training her while I'm working on that isn't a problem. Dallaire gave silent cheer as Thera walked over to her, comfortably rubbing the girl's head as she enjoyed the moment, with a good atmosphere making all of the difference in the world to her. So you want to talk about it? Ben asked later as they were laying in bed, seeing through her as he so often did. Just had a not-so-great encounter at the hospital, but I'm fine now, she told him as she rested her head against his chest. Seeing you act like a happy father with Dallaire manages to be cute enough to fix any mood. Again, I'm not that much older than her. The vibe is definitely happy older brother. Ha! Sure. Keep telling yourself that, she told him, feeling her lips curl as she laid there, her thoughts drifting as she let herself begin to nod off. It was a nice feeling to love someone, nicer than she would have ever expected, and it did sort out the topic that had been on her thoughts for weeks. She intended to fully enjoy however much time they had together and whatever new experiences that might entail. Which means I might need to ask Mom for help. Ugh, already dreading that conversation. I guess I'll stop by when we're at Craftsman's Tower, so I have a couple weeks to figure out how to broach the topic with her. And Ben too, I guess. There was already enough to worry about for the future, so she did her best to ignore what was sure to be a couple awkward bits as she instead focused on things to look forward to instead. As the 2 notifications went off in his head, Ben let out a slow, drawn-out breath as he felt the change to his mind. The entire forest he was connected to reacting to the feeling as well. There was pain, of course, but not nearly as much as there had been when his minds had last split or when he'd gained a level to mental expansion so shortly after. What he currently felt wasn't a full-blown migraine, instead just being a headache, with the pain he was experiencing being comparable to what he'd dealt with a little over a month before his last one had disappeared. It was going to be annoying to deal with, but he would live as it eventually went away. Other than that, though, was the feeling of the shape of his mind changing with the 2 levels. Like the last time he'd gotten a level of mental expansion, he felt the strands of thought in his head fray, but now even more so with the effects of parallel thought added to it. It was to the point where they'd gone from just a little short of a typical human mind to perhaps the peak of what one would normally achieve, everything in his head being strengthened with the skills as the very way he would think changed to accommodate the new level of mental power. But that's fine because this is just my mind now and I should be safe from any more level-ups. I couldn't even begin to guess how any of those skills would awaken. Hey, don't go wishing that evil on me. No need to rub it in. He grumbled back. The fact his connect hadn't awakened after a solid month of training with the woods was nothing but a disappointment. Since the forest's interconnected mind just felt so big he'd thought he'd had a chance by going at it, but as each day passed the odds of success had felt worse and worse. Adding to the fact that he'd leveled the 2 skills he didn't want to on his very last day of trying, and it all combined to reflect his level of luck in the world. Who knows though, maybe this will be the blessing in disguise that lets me finally get a level of pain resistance. You okay, Ben? Dallaire asked him, pulling him from his thoughts and back to her as she finished up carving a branch, only to see the pained look on his face. Ah, I'm fine, so don't worry, he told her, ruffling her hair as he did. Just had a small headache come over me is all. It looks good, by the way. You've been an excellent student to teach over the last month, so make sure you keep practicing everything. Okay? MHM. She knew he was leaving that day as well as anyone, but as much as she wanted to ignore it, she couldn't keep it from her head. Do you really have to go? I do. Sorry, kiddo, but I've got some responsibilities to take care of. MMH, but everyone's been a lot happier with you here, she muttered, resting her head on his arm as they Saturday. All the adults keep worrying. But while you've been here, they've been too focused on getting your help than to worry. Ha! Well, I've also helped about as much as I can. He'd redone plenty of enchantments in the town again while he was around, having a whole new level of skill to do what he could since the last time he'd been there, and more than a few of them had been happy to take advantage of that, meaning plenty of his time not in the woods had gone towards that as well. Not that he minded, it let him show Dallaire a bit more about enchanting as a result, but it had been one of many things that kept his visit busy. Still, he understood what she was saying. Same as anywhere, people were worried, and despite how they might try to keep their concerns to themselves to not stress out their children over something that couldn't be changed, kids were perceptive too. He didn't know how much Dallaire and the other children in the village really understood what was happening, but he was sure she wasn't clueless as he tried to figure out if there was any conceivable way to give her any sort of peace. It wasn't an easy topic. There really wasn't much that could be said to make things okay. How were you supposed to encourage someone when in a period of years, they and everyone they knew could be dead? How was anyone supposed to discuss that with a child? The most he could really do was just try and be encouraging as he stood up, lifting her up to sit on his shoulders as he walked them both back to the village. Myriad, how do you reassure a kid about the end of the world? Gee, thanks. Anything he could think to say felt like it would be a lie, and given that he wasn't sure how much Dallaire was aware of about the world's fate, saying too much could only make things worse, leaving him little in the way of options to reassure her, so instead he didn't, opting for a different branch of conversation in the hopes of distracting her. You know, when I'm worried about something, I personally like to take my mind off things. What do you think might help ease yours a bit? If you stay. I'm sorry, Dallaire, but I can't. I need to go off and play my little part in helping your village get back their peace of mind. I'd honestly be much happier staying too, but I know too many people off to help with things to be able to do that. MMH. Tell you what, have you decided on what job you'll take after apprentice mage? I don't know. Everyone else in the village is going to be taking plant mage, but I don't want to focus on that. So it's going to be true mage or apprentice craftsman? I guess. Well then, my young apprentice-to-be, I'll make sure to send you some supplies that you can use to train for both jobs. Okay? I'll send off enough tools and materials and books that if you change your mind, your mom is going to go insane about how cluttered I've made your home. And anything else you want to. Come on. There must be something you'd like. It was bribery, plain and simple, but it was working. Dallaire was quiet as she thought, her mind poring over everything and coming to a single option. You need to send more games for everyone. Even grandma's liking them. Ha, sure, will do. And they need to be even better than the ones you've already brought, she went on. The best you can make. I'll have you know that I only do my best with everything I make. But sure, I have some ideas for more, so make sure you watch your mail. I'll have them out in a few weeks for you. Okay, good. Even if it wasn't as good as it would have been to just have him stay, it was an option that the village as a whole could use to distract themselves, so she would take it, even if it wasn't what she really wanted. Resting her head atop his own as he carried her back, she couldn't help but mutter one final thing. And you need to promise to come back. You got it, I promise. Opening his eyes after leaving the archive, Ben couldn't help but let out a disappointed groan before letting his mind out of it. So it looks like that also failed. In the hours spent flying from the Dryads' village back to the gate, he'd been in there, experiencing almost 10 days subjectively because of the time dilation effect acting on his mind, only to fail in the goal he'd gone in with, awakening meditation. When he'd asked himself how he'd ever conceivably do it, that had been the most obvious option. His entire time in there he'd been using the skill with all of his minds, hoping against hope that would be enough to push the skill past its limits, all to grab hold of the rewards for such an act. While getting the skill to the second tier had no obvious value in and of itself, the purpose of that bit of work hadn't been to let him meditate even better. No, what he had been after was the other benefit there was to be had, the bonuses to his attributes. Even if it would have just been a 6% increase, that still would have been really, really nice to get. He thought with a sigh. Looks like my efforts just aren't paying off. That's actually a pretty interesting point. Obviously, I can't waste all of that time, but I'm sure I'll be getting a few sleepless nights while I'm here. If I find myself exhausted enough, I could enter the archive for an hour a day to squeeze out a day's worth of training and see if that gets me the results. It at least has to be getting me closer, right? Just you wait. I'm on my way to Zen mastery. After I awaken that skill, then I'll be reaching levels of reality you gods don't even know exist. So no luck then? Thera asked him, noticing his eyes open up as they rushed through the clouds. Not this time. Why does this sort of thing have to be so hard? Of course it's hard. The fact that you have 3 is abnormal enough, trying to get 2 more is insane. So you don't think I'll manage? I didn't say that. It's just that if you do and word gets out, then you'll have to deal with even more people trying to recruit you. Okay, note to self, make sure if I awaken any more skills it's done in private. He let a couple of his minds be consumed by the thought while the rest focused on other things as they finally made it to the gate, traveling through it and the space beyond to finally end up at their ultimate destination, Craftsman's Tower. Much like the Magic Towers, it was a city on a coast, being an important site for all races regardless of where they lived, with each of them needing access to it for the chance to test themselves and grow further by taking advantage of the massive trial the gods had left them, along with the resources that had gathered in the land as a result of craftsmen coming from the world over to face it. Despite that similarity, though, the city itself was far more vast. They could see the tower that made the city what it was, stretching into the sky, waiting to be challenged. But at the opposite end, off in the distance, there was the beam of light jutting up, waiting for the 30 short days until the battle for the planet began. If it was Earth, he would have expected the land to have already been evacuated, but the world he was on had the key difference of the gate network, ready to ease the evacuation as people moved to different cities without the threat so close by for the months that the demons poured out of them. And I still seriously don't get the logistics behind how the demons invade. With hundreds of worlds having been conquered, the way it occurred was well known. The invasion points would be marked, and after a period of nearly a year, gates would open at their locations, only for them to close again after 30 days of a constant outpour from the demons, followed by them opening again almost a year from when they first did. It seemed horribly inefficient from the perspective of a conquest, even if theories about why they did so abounded. And I get that, but if that is the case, what are they going to do once they have every planet in the galaxy? If the point of this is really to help them reach the sapient stage of their development and let the intelligent invaders grow to greater heights, then eventually they'll run out of worlds to conquer. So we're just the next stepping stone to all of reality falling to their might. It was hard not to. The situation they were in just felt too outrageous to take seriously. No matter how well off they may have been, they were the next in a long line of dominoes about to fall, and the more he learned about what was happening, the more inevitable it felt. It was late enough when they arrived that meeting up with Falk and Sonia, along with any exploring, was left for the next day, as they instead found their way to Analia's embassy, getting the free rooms they were provided and preparing for the night. Ben, for his part, flopped into bed, staying awake only because of the guest he was expecting as Quillith appeared before his eyes. It was such a simple arrival. One moment there was nobody in the room with him, and the next second the alien appeared, no lights or fanfare that one might imagine for something that seemed as grand as projecting oneself across realities, leaving Ben to look at the man who he'd grown acquainted with in the last few years. "What's wrong?" was the first thing he asked. Even without having a firm grasp on his body language, Quillith gave off a distinct impression of something being off that Ben wasn't used to seeing. "You know, you seem shockingly good at understanding moods at times. It's honestly astounding when I'm forced to consider the fact that your system can't be helping you at all with reading me. Is it just a talent, or do you have a sixth sense for it? I just look at the people I talk to, and that's not an answer. Out with it, 'cause you look bad." For just a moment the Gray stood in silence, looking like he might just disappear instead of giving any sort of proper answer. It was only after a deep breath and pulling his eyes from Ben that he gave voice to what weighed on his mind. "Our star died." 3 words that carried the weight of a world. The little alien said them so easily, but Ben couldn't begin to imagine the feelings going on beneath the surface. "I thought you said you guys should have a decade." "Ha, you know, it's funny. We actually would have if we hadn't been so set on trying to change our fates." His voice was filled with derision entirely directed at his kind. "But our desire to keep the light of our world just brought its end about all the faster." "Your experiment caused it?" he asked, remembering what Quillith had told him in their last meeting, only to get a shake of his head in return. "No. Well, not entirely. For a few thousand years we've been trying everything we could. In that time, information was shuffled and misplaced, failed experiments lost to time. It seems an ancient one that we'd all but forgotten about interacted with our last and caused a runaway effect nobody expected. It is disappointing." Ben knew the words were an understatement. He could see how tightly Quillith clenched his fists before him, the feelings of it all trapped and simmering beneath the surface in a way that would never really leave. "And your people?" "Oh, for the most part, it's what you'd expect. It's not like we didn't already have the infrastructure set up to deal with it when it came. But there were a few accidents as the light vanished and a few more who'd decided they didn't want to live under an artificial sky. Ultimately, it's fine. My people will be able to go on for thousands of years given how far we've prepared for all of this. Thousands of years trapped on a dying planet. Another one as doomed as the one he was trapped on, each one ticking by with their own different countdowns as he sighed. Go home today, Quillith. I'm sure there's a lot you'd rather be doing right now than spending time with me. Yes, actually, I think I will. Thank you for your understanding, Ben. I will be back in a month when things aren't quite so fresh. Try to keep safe. With that, the alien vanished, letting Ben lay back and close his eyes, forcing his mind into his god's realm. Ben, there's nothing you can do. There's no reason to let this bother you so much, Myriad told him as soon as he arrived, all concern being waved off the second after. I'm not bothered, and I know there's nothing I can do. Since I have the time, I just want to look at the summoning spell again is all. So if you would. Myriad just sighed as he brought up the spell in all of its majesty, Ben craning his neck as he tried to take it in with all of his minds despite the headache as Hellori got off his god to stand beside him. I understand that what he said was upsetting, but you've already looked at this for months without any real progress, she told him, looking at it as well. A couple decent theories on how to lower the cost doesn't mean much without the knowledge on how to put them into practice. I'm just having a look, he said again as his eyes focused on different parts, trying to make sense of how it would all work together as he once again faced the simple truth that no matter how powerful his thoughts were, they couldn't handle all he was seeing. There was simply too much going on, but if the problem was too big it just needed to be split into smaller, more manageable pieces. Myriad, do me a favor and slice off the top meter of this and bring it down for me to look at. He at least understood where magic was going in and out of it, as well as the direction where both mana and faith were moving for it. All he needed to do was find a place to start. If looking at the full picture hadn't worked after months, then he just needed to cut it into smaller sections. As his god did as he asked, cutting off the top layer of the spell and bringing it down for Ben to look at, it was still too much, so he did it again and again, removing entire swaths of the spell and leaving him with a 1 by 1 meter cube of it, the frontmost right corner. As just a piece of a greater whole, it was useless, like trying to infer the workings of a rocket from a single screw. But it was at a scale where he could finally have something to begin to examine as he put the full force of his thoughts to memorizing even the most minute detail, and feeling for the first time that he just might be on the right track. Okay, this could be the start of something, he muttered. Myriad, do me a favor and cut up the entire spell into sections like this. It might take some time, but I think this could be the beginning of me actually making some progress so long as I can keep going from here. Cutting it up had been such a small change, but one that instantly made his wheels turn as he thought of where he'd go next, trying to decipher the less obvious components of the spell, seeing how their structure worked together and how the mana moved as it traveled through each section and how that all built up into a final product. It was going to be long, tedious work, but that was exactly what he excelled at as the gods with him mentally prepared for a long night of theory crafting and study. You look terrible. Thanks for that. I'm serious. Did you sleep even a little bit last night? Thera asked, looking at Ben's exhausted form with blatant worry. Technically. So you were up all night talking with your god, of course you were. But you don't usually look so bad after it. It was a slightly more involved conversation than usual. Don't pay it too much mind, he explained, not wanting to go into too much detail. There was no need to make her think about what another world was going through with their own end so close at hand. Anyway, should we head off? Don't want to leave them waiting. She gave him a suspicious look, feeling like there was more being left unsaid, but agreed nonetheless as they left the embassy and made their way through the streets, getting to the head of the Craftsmen's Guild. The building itself was impressive, as were the ones around it. They all stood high, the walls being made of enchanted glass to keep a constant level of light coming through them for the people working within to enjoy and making the total of it an architectural marvel. The ones surrounding it were much the same too, only serving a purpose beyond administrative work. In a similar vein to the magic towers, the land they found themselves in also had a place that hoarded the knowledge of its focus, with 6 large buildings each devoted to differing crafting-related topics and filled to the brim with books. It was a place he fully intended to make use of while he was there amongst everything else he'd planned on doing. But it wasn't the focus for the time being, as they instead saw Falk waiting for them out front as they both rushed over. So how'd it go, boy? Was the first thing he wanted to know, with Ben's defeated look being enough of an answer for anyone. Ah well, don't let it get you down, these things are far from easy. I know, but they could stand to be a little easier, he grumbled as Thera spoke up. And is Auntie not with you? She's with your mother right now. I'm sure you can imagine, but Pell is having a bit of a hectic time with everything going on, so she's there to be support before things get too bad. Well, I'll go through to see them both in a day or two then. I need to talk to Mom anyway. In that case, let me know when you want to head over, Ben told her. I need to order a bunch of diamond sheets from your dad. I promised Delaire some games, and I have something I need to test out too. I'm going to be having a bit of a personal talk with her, so if you just tell me what you need, I'll make sure to bring them back, she said, not looking at him as she did. Even turned away, though, it didn't keep either Ben nor Falk from noticing her face twinkle in the light as they each wondered just what sort of talk they were going to have, but ultimately left the matter alone as they focused on their own goal for the day. So are we heading out soon? Just waiting on one more, Falk told them. When I told him you'd be joining us, he wanted to meet up with you, but since he's busy and already late, it might be a bit. Before either of them could ask just who it was he was talking about, though, a voice called out to them as the door of the guild opened, with the head of it all, Ibaru, walking out. Sorry for the holdup. It's lovely to see you both again, the troll hybrid told them, smiling at them all despite the atmosphere filling the city as Ben and Thera returned the greeting. It's no worries, but don't you have more important things to do than to go around with us? Ben asked. He couldn't imagine the head of the guild having the sort of free time that would allow such a break, especially not with an invasion point on his doorstep, but the man just waved away the question. You're coming out to see my pet project, and since you'll be on the reserve team to help if anything goes wrong, how could I not? Besides, I could use a bit of a break from time to time, so let's head out. Bah, you just want to leave things to your underlings, Falk said, not believing him as he laughed. If I don't give them any practice with my work, then they'll never be able to handle it when I'm gone. Besides, this is important. I'm leading around someone who's both an awakened craftsman and enchanter if the rumors are to be believed. Speaking of, lovely to see you survived, Ben. I was thrilled when I got the news. And I was thrilled to live. It's nice to see you again too, Ibaru. From there they walked through town, the topic sticking closely to their main focus and leaving Thera bored from the technical talk as they discussed the art of crafting as a whole, along with the finer points where their work was put into practice. Ben was thrilled to learn that, like himself, Ibaru had the crafting skill, and at the 9th level on top of it. Even more interesting was what other skill he had with it. Magic smithing. It seemed that the guild leader had taken advantage of the system in the early days of his training, and that fact let him reach his current heights. Crafting was essentially a combined skill, meaning that once a person had it, they couldn't gain the individual skills that made it up. However, there was a workaround to that. If a person already had a crafting type skill and then trained in multiple ones they didn't, they could still get the crafting skill normally. By having both, it let his smithing reach beyond its expected limits, as well as gave a certain level of ease in raising crafting too. But it still wasn't as easy as it sounded. Even though it could be done, already having smithing did increase the difficulty in getting the other. It spoke to the level of work Ibaru put in to get where he was in life. But the skill synergy made it worth the effort, Ibaru told them with a smile. And getting to the 9th level of crafting on top of it gave me that convenient bit of analysis to go with it. Plus, it makes things easier for understanding the goings-on in the rest of the guild. And I take it one of the skills it awakened with was enchanting, right? You did show off that bit during the contest. Ha, that it did. That and my fire magic went into it, and it's been paying off ever since. Even if I don't get to enjoy it as much as I once did. Guild work does keep me a bit distant from my forge, but I still enjoy putting the time in where I can. From there, the conversation took a turn to the projects Ben had been working on since he'd regained his freedom until they finally reached their destination. The edge of the city and the beginning of the coming battlefield. It was the closest he'd been to any of the invasion points and saw it was far bigger than he'd initially thought, the beam of light leaving a roughly 200-meter circle on the ground, waiting for the day it would pour out its death and destruction. But there was plenty of other things to see too. The land had been not only cleared, but raised around the coming gate to prepare for the expected battle, giving them the advantage of a high ground as armies were already getting set up. Different groups covering the areas they were responsible for as thousands of people were out just to set up their traps, defenses, and various fortifications, with untold tens or hundreds of thousands more all ready to come when the day would finally arrive. Farther from the center were some medical areas for on-site treatment, but the majority of cases would be going to the opposite side of the city, a sturdy defense set up and waiting for anyone they would need to take, or else through the world's own gate network. Nations that didn't have the threat on their doorsteps not only taking in those who would be displaced, but taking care of what wounded they could. Seeing it up close, Ben couldn't help but think of the scale of what was coming through, and the level of logistics needed to have any hope of dealing with it. For a month straight, there would be constant bodies coming out in a wave as each army wouldn't even have time to deal with their dead. Any fighter that managed to survive long enough would need to do their best to get out of the fray for whatever bit of rest they could, while new ones would need to go in to replace them. It all just seemed like chaos, and right at the back of it was exactly where he would be. At the edge of town was the weapon it seemed the Craftsman's Guild was placing their hopes into. A behemoth that looked more like a building. It had a barrel square at its front with an opening as wide as he was tall, with a clear line of fire to the invasion point. The only thing that seemed ready for whatever was to come, even as he had trouble keeping his eyes on it. So that's the weapon that will end the war, huh? It feels hard to look at. Was it enchanted to make people want to keep their eyes off it? He muttered, mostly to himself but still getting a response. Quick on the uptake, aren't you? Ibaru said. It can be fought past, of course, but we're hoping that anything rushing from the gates won't have the presence of mind if they happen to get too close somehow and just rush by it. I've put all of my resources into making this, and some of the best minds the guild had to offer spent the last 20 years working on and refining the idea. We admittedly wish we had more time on it, but then who doesn't? If this shows its value here, then we can have each nation and faith devote the resources needed to making more for as many gates as we can with the time we have. It won't be easy, but then ensuring the future was never going to be. And I don't suppose I'll be able to get my hands on the blueprints at all, could I? Ben asked, already salivating as he looked at it with any fear for the future forgotten. You know, since I'm here to help in case anything goes wrong and all, you'll ideally be a backline worker with your teacher in the event that an emergency crops up. We do have a number of people who have the hands-on experience putting it together after all. But yes, of course I'll supply you with the blueprints when we get back. Very cool. All he wanted to do was crack it open to see what made it tick, but he'd settle for what he could get. Even his mana sense alone made him want to see more of it, the dense weave of enchantments throughout it being enough to captivate him, with his mind only pulling away from it as he felt something squeeze his hand. Even still, it took a second to take his eyes off of it to see Thera. Her eyes just as glued to it as his were, only with a deep look of discomfort instead of his curiosity. "What's up? Doesn't something feel a little weird to you?" she asked, an edge in her voice he wasn't used to hearing. "Weird? I mean, it just feels, I don't know, bad?" She couldn't put it into words, but as soon as she'd seen the weapon she hadn't liked it. Just being close was prickling at her skin as she tried to put a finger on what was bothering her about it, only for the reason to elude her entirely. It was a worry she'd only meant to share with Ben, but her uncle and Ibaru were close enough to hear as well, with the latter giving her a comforting smile. "It is a tool meant to deal untold death and destruction in an area with everyone exuding their dread. It's not shocking being here might leave you a little uncomfortable. I think that's enough for a look anyway. Why don't we start heading back and we can get you those blueprints?" "Ah, maybe that's for the best right now." Ben only wanted to look into it deeper, but he understood the discomfort well enough. If the mood of every town and city in the world was bad as people counted down the days, it was at its absolute worst at the invasion points. Everyone who was there was working knowing that they'd be closer to the front lines than anyone would want to be, facing something that nobody could be asked to take on if the stakes weren't so high. When he thought about it in those terms, then he couldn't help but feel prickly too. But as they started walking back, Ibaru came in to distract him from his thoughts. "Ah, by the way, Ben, I never did thank you for writing out those reports I requested. I actually have someone who's interested in talking about ritual magic with you, if you might have some time in a few days." "Oh, sure, I don't mind. I was just planning on spending my free time at the library, so where should I meet them?" "If you don't mind an interruption, if you just leave your name at the front desk, then the librarian can point them to you when they get here." "Sounds good. And in that case, do you mind if I make a little request myself?" "It depends, but I'll at least hear it. I don't think it's anything objectionable. We're still waiting for the main forces that are covering this point to arrive, right? When they get here, I was thinking of setting up a stand to do some pro bono work. Just wanted to make sure that was cool first." "Ha! I'm not going to turn down anyone who's going to do some free work to help my home. I think most people are showing up a week before things kick off, so if you want to then be my guest. I'll write up a permit for you so nobody will give you any trouble." "Awesome, thanks." It wasn't much, but since he could, he figured he'd do some free enchanting for armors and weapons. All it cost him was his mana after all, and it had the potential to save some lives. No matter how little it was in comparison to what any soldier might do, it was a way to put some effort toward the good of the world. He might as well do what he could. "And that's everyone done," Thera sighed as she leaned her head on Sonia's arm. "How long do you think till this place starts to fill up again?" "I'm sure it won't be truly full until the wounded start being rushed in. Since you brought the patients down to zero, Lux can stop in easily enough before going to do the rest of her work." The Hospital of Analia was going to be one of the main treatment grounds for any patients whose injuries walked the fine line between needing to be treated on-site and those that weren't so severe as to require immediate healing. Thanks to the power of her father, her home nation was going to be one of the safest, even with an invasion point right at their doorstep, meaning that not only would the citizens not be evacuating for the first wave, but they'd be helping with war efforts in other ways, such as supporting the injured. In a time like that, after all, it didn't matter if anyone ended up charmed. The effects would wear off no matter how undesirable the person under them might find it after, and being charmed was better than being dead. "But with that done, I think I'll be going to see Falk. Care to join me?" Sonia asked, getting a shake of her head in reply. "Not this time. I need to talk to Mom, and I think I need to see Lux too." Since I have the time, I'm hoping she'll let me help her with her work. The Great Light Spirit was doing her part by doing the same thing Thera had been, only on a larger scale. Her aunt had been going to the hospitals reachable through each gate, providing all of the healing she could to ease their burdens for what was to come, and Thera fully intended to join her if she could. It would make things faster for both of them, and by being with her aunt when it happened she wouldn't need to worry about anyone trying to recruit her. Thera would get the experience she desired, as well as the peace of being able to focus on her work. Both options desirable, considering what was to come. She'd known the day was coming and knew that she, like so many others, would be fighting. But as it got closer it felt more and more real. She didn't want to have to play any part in it. She wanted to hide away with Ben and her family and act like the world wasn't going to fall down around them. She wanted to treat staying at Craftsman's Tower like any other trip, seeing the sights and exploring the city instead of being buried under the feeling of its oppressive aura when just being near the battlefield felt like it was pricking at her skin. She just wanted the long life she could expect to be filled with peace. And I can keep wanting things that just won't happen, she told herself. I can want them all I want as long as I deal with the reality of it all. I think I can finish up my job soon, so I just need to focus on that and I can just distract myself the rest of the time. It's fine. Well, as fine as it can be. She wished she shared Ben's unnatural level of focus on days like that. Being able to wholly put her mind to her tasks at hand would be a blessing. But failing that she could do the next best thing as she went to find her mother to have a conversation she was sure would haunt her thoughts for the rest of her life. "Ah, Thera, I'm so glad you stopped by," Pelania said, wrapping her daughter in a tight hug as she did. "It's nice you remember little old me at times like this. I already visit you more than I'd ever planned on when I moved to Stonewall, you know?" "True. But that doesn't mean I can't want to see my lovely daughter even more." "MMH, well, I guess it's nice to see you too," she said, giving in to her mother's love. "How are things here?" "Calmer than you might think. We've prepared all we can by now. All that's left is seeing where something will go wrong and putting out any fires that pop up. Funa, Carly, and Glob are off to the gate they'll cover, so it should be an easy way for them to gain plenty of experience and hopefully complete a couple jobs, and other than that your father is off talking to the spirits to try and figure out where each kind can be sent to do the most good. And you? Are you sure you don't want to stay here instead?" For just a moment her mother's mask slipped, letting her see the deep worry brewing beneath. So many people were planning to fight, but Thera was her only child. No matter how Pelania could act, she wanted her to be safe. "I'll be with Auntie and Uncle Falk. It will be fine, Mom. Besides, I'll be acting pretty far back. I'm basically security for Uncle's work." "Humph, I'd rather my sister and that stubborn old ape were here too, you know. Honestly, why must the people I love be such a handful? I can only imagine the two of them having aneurysms if they heard you of all people calling them a handful. Everyone just wants to do what they can, Mom. But anyway, that's not really what I came here to talk about." She could feel herself starting to blush, a fact her mother could see clear enough as Pelinia's eyes took a look of deep interest, always ready to enjoy whatever conversation could leave such a look on her daughter's face. "Of course, sweetheart. I'm always happy to talk. That's what makes doing it with you so hard," Thera muttered. "You already look way too into this, and you don't even know what I'm going to say." "Ah, but those shiny cheeks tell me it will be something entertaining," she told her with a laugh, reaching out to cup her daughter's face as Thera pulled back. "So out with it before my curiosity gets the better of me. What's on your mind? There's something I was hoping you'd get for me." "Yes. Anti-life rings." For the second time that day, the typically playful face her mother wore slipped away, revealing a look she'd never seen on her in all of the years she'd been raised. Her mother was not only blushing but clearly at a loss.
"Ah, oh, Ise.
You know, Thera, I have no issue with that sort of thing, but going from very clearly saying that you have no desire for romance to jumping into the far end. I mean, it's obviously Ben you're thinking about, right? And he really is a lovely boy and your father, and I completely approve of him, and we're hoping for this sort of development eventually, but you don't need to rush into things just because you're worried about the future and give some proper thought to what you want. I mean, if you do, that's great, but you need to plan for the future, not just act because you're worried about not being around for it, so I think first you should properly tell him how you're feeling and go from there. It would have been amusing to hear her mother ramble like that if the topic didn't feel so embarrassing. So for her own sake, she was quick to put a stop to it before her mother could go on. Actually, my relationship with Ben has been, well, romantic for about a year now, and yeah, I'm thinking about advancing it, but this isn't out of the blue and it's not a reaction to the world ending. I love him. What? Her mother yelled after the seconds it took to process what she just heard. All embarrassment forgotten in an instant. You've been dating him for a year and this is my first time hearing about this? Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting to hear these words from my horribly stubborn daughter? Wait, does this mean Sonia knows too and you've both been hiding it from me? Why? Because you've wanted this way too much and I knew it was going to be an uncomfortable conversation. Not to mention you literally forced us into an engagement. Honestly, I'm a little surprised you haven't heard about it already. Greed ended his show with Ben confessing and the song spread enough that even I've heard it a couple times now. Wait, the ruby crab that stayed with us for a few days after he got out of the trial? Ugh. He'd been sending invitations to his show for months, as thanks that I just haven't had time to accept. Are you saying I could have found out ages ago? Sounds like it. So are you going to help or not? Humph. Why don't you just ask Ben to make them then? She said as she pouted. He could probably do a better job than anything I could get my hands on. Ahem. Well, I haven't exactly spoken to him about it yet. Really now? Her mother asked, eyes lighting up again as the queen continued through the broad range of emotions she hadn't expected to experience that day. In that case, you'll really have to let me know how it goes. Absolutely not. So are you going to help me? I wouldn't even be asking if I wouldn't just break any enchantment I had to power myself. I'm sure. All right then. Come with me. She quickly led Thera to her room before opening the closet, digging around a bit before tossing a box to her, which once opened revealed a collection of mithril bands with white mana crystals set within, over 20 of them with each at a different size. Why do you just have these ready to go? Because my lovely daughter destroys any enchantment she touches and I figured it would be better to have them and not need them than need them and not have them. They all have 9th level enchantments on them so they should work fine. And the sizes? She asked, picking up one just slightly smaller than her wrist. Please, your aunt is in love with a yeti and I married a great spirit. I wasn't going to just assume that if you ever met someone they'd be an incubus. And look at me, I was right for thinking that. Though I guess Ben's body type is similar enough that I didn't need to prepare anything quite that extreme. Thera hadn't actually expected to get them quite so easily. A part of her had even thought that, with everything going on, she wouldn't get her hands on them till after the first wave. As convenient as it was for things to go so smoothly, it meant one completely different thing for her as she was now faced with the reality of bringing the topic up with Ben. So this is the tower, huh? Ben thought as he stood before the giant trial, taking it all in. It was just as large as any of the magic towers, though it had a few key differences to go along with it. Instead of there being a single door for the terrestrial races to enter, there were 5, each of which had a different symbol at the front. A hammer and tongs for smithing, wood and a knife for woodworking and construction, beakers for alchemy, pencils and brushes for the arts, and the final one which had them all. There weren't doors for every potential crafting type skill, with cooking, stoneworking, and sewing being notable exceptions, but there were enough considering that those who wanted to take on the trial would get that single tower compared to the magic ones, and they'd have options to choose from beyond being proficient in everything. Which does make it a little interesting that they have a door specifically for doing a bit of everything. He thought to himself as the god Nair spoke out in his mind. He explained, interesting. And no clues to go with these ones I see? Unlike the magic doors which all had a little something extra that anyone with a sharp eye could take advantage of, the doors of Craftsman's Tower just let the challenger know what sort of path they might face, no hints to warn them of whatever lay within. Well, isn't that demotivating? He thought back as he placed his hand on the front, running his fingers over the grooves of each symbol on the door that held them all. The door he would personally challenge if he was going to, as the question of if he should step beyond filled his mind. He didn't think he could do it. His items were still square in the middle of ultra-rare, meaning that he still had plenty of room to grow, but on the other hand, he felt himself running out of time with each passing day. If he could somehow get his connect awakened in the next week, that would give him time to rush through the gates, collecting all of the high-leveled skills he could and start trying to put them to use, definitely making things that would be high ultra-rare and maybe even legendary. It was the sort of thing that could potentially turn the tide of battle. Wasn't it worth the risk? But on the other hand, if I try and fail, then I'll lose the opportunity to do it in the future. What if I only make it to the 3rd floor? Worse, what if I don't get past the 1st? I'll have lost out on the chance to awaken my skill, when if I just put off challenging it till before the 2nd or 3rd wave I could have much better odds. Is it worth it to ignore it for now to have a better chance later? There's literally lives on the line, but then doing it when I'm not certain could cost even more in the end. Nair broke in, interrupting his train of thought. What's with you? You were so gung-ho about it before I dealt with the Earth Tower. Now that I'm seriously considering it, you think I should wait? Myriad filled in place of Nair's silence. Wait, what? Really? His god went on. Oh cool, sweet. Nair yelled. Oh please, maybe if the blessing you guys would give wasn't so weak I'd feel a little bad. But I'm sure when you compare losing out to me against all the faith you've earned in the past from these trials, you guys are still coming out ahead. The god grumbled. It was just a little reassuring to hear, so after only another moment Ben took his hand away from the door. He knew he could still raise his skills more. He would get to the point where he could no longer grow on his own before taking the challenge to squeeze whatever bit of potential he could from himself and the gods when the time came. Okay, this is insane. This is too insane. It really is a super weapon. Despite being in the great library of Craftsman's Tower, Ben had yet to put his eyes on any of the books. Unlike the one found at the Magic Towers, the floors weren't divided or restricted, so there were piles of things to get his hands on. But in that moment he was sure that he was already holding the most interesting documents by far. The schematics for Ibaru's superweapon were in his hands, and he couldn't help but go over them again and again. Not just out of a desire to have them memorized in the event something went wrong, but for the pure beauty of them. It was a tool he could understand Falk and other craftsmen wanting to put their hopes into, and he could see his teacher's touches on it as well. In fact, he was fairly sure it couldn't exist without his teacher. Ben may not have been certain what the Yeti's death magic level was, but he was positive it was awakened given that Falk could use it to make legendary items, and that feeling was all but confirmed by just what the weapon was supposed to do. It gathered mana from the many expensive materials that made it up, condensing it to a single point after passing through all of the enchantments on the machine, and fired it off to the invasion point, creating an area that would not only drain the life force of anything unfortunate enough to come through, but kill the very cells that made them up, rotting their muscles and weakening them drastically in the instant they were hit by the effects, making it so they couldn't rush to escape the area of effect. It was savage, brutal, and based on what he was reading, seemed to be impossible by all accounts. Even if it's the size of a house, the amount of power it would need to get this effect seems like it's way too much unless the enchantments were 3rd tier, and as much as Falk may want to hide his skills, there's no way I wouldn't be able to see that. So where's all the power coming from? He did the math for what he was seeing again and again in his head, making sure he wasn't missing something obvious, something that would answer exactly where this supply of power was coming from, only to keep coming up blank. Yep, that seals it. All of this is helping, but it's not enough, meaning that at least part of it is coming from one of these. Not everything was revealed in the blueprint. While it was fairly generous with the information it provided on how the structure was made and worked, a couple parts were left annoyingly blank. Presumably, information that needed to be kept secret, perhaps even one of those secrets his god kept warning him about that mortals shouldn't know. It was all sorts of aggravating too. He didn't like the feeling of knowledge being kept from him, least of all when it came to such interesting topics, and he had no way of unraveling the mystery with the information on hand. Let's see, if I had to guess I'd say the sphere at its core is what's doing the heavy lifting here, but it's only the size of a basketball. That seems way too small, but with how the enchantments are set up, it's the only thing that makes sense. So in that case, how would I fit all of that extra power in there? I guess if an awakened space mage enchanted it, they could expand the interior with a positively insane level of depth and then just fill it to the brim with rainbow mana crystals. That would have the benefit of not having to leave them all outside and exposed to danger, but there's some issues that would make that difficult too. So what else could it be? I guess if I look at one of my own interests, souls are shockingly good at storing mana, aren't they? Hell, Thera alone has 500,000 and the great spirits each have 1 million. Hypothetically, If something like an animal's soul could be captured and somehow forcefully expanded to hold more power, if it could be extracted after, couldn't something like this be done? I doubt that's what it is, but I should maybe look into that idea a bit myself. It's not bad. His god would be screaming if he'd heard the thought Ben had just decided had some interesting potential, but all of the ones he interacted with were busy with their own work, leaving him no one to talk to as he kept fiddling with other potential options that might allow for the level of power he was seeing, only to fail to find anything that seemed too viable. He would have spent far more time on that very question too if it weren't for the sounds of someone coming to the desk he sat at, knocking on it politely to get his attention as he tore his eyes away from what he was reading to find the man standing before him. At first, he took the man smiling down at him to be an elf, though on closer inspection that wasn't quite right. He'd seen a few before, his previous caretaker Leahy being the main one to come to mind, and while the similarities were close there were some distinct differences too. The person before him had sharper features and shorter ears, though still long by human standards. Long enough that if he'd seen them on Leahy when he'd arrived on the world, then he would have reacted in the same way. Beyond that though was a feeling of power that pricked at his mana sense, with all of the clues pointing to one species he was aware of. High Elf, one of the elven offshoots brought about by the meddling of a long-dead evil god. The biggest differences beyond the superficial changes to their appearance was their higher capacity for mana and a couple centuries extra to the standard elves' already long lifespans. All that left was what he wanted with him. Pardon me, I hope I'm not bothering you, he said, still wearing a pleasant smile. Would you happen to be Ben? Ibaru told me you'd be expecting me. Oh, yes, of course. It's nice to meet you. Naloth, he said, shaking Ben's hand in greeting. And it's a pleasure to meet you as well, especially since you wrote this. What he pulled out was a copy of the book Ben had written on ritual magic, properly bound beyond the loose sheets that he'd submitted when he sent them off with Falk, yet looking well-read despite how recently he must have gotten his hands on it. Speaking to the volume, he valued the subject. Right, I was told you had an interest in it, so I'd be happy to chat if you want. But I should probably let you know up front that it's not my area of expertise. I apply it to my enchanting, but I've only been a part of a single ritual. Ha! I'd say you have more experience with it than nearly every other mage on the planet, he said warmly. It's considered something of a lost art as a result of the power gained from the system, but I can't help but look at that as pure foolishness. To let such a powerful tool fade away simply because a different source of power showed up, all of our ancestors should have been working to continue to refine it together with the system, not abandoning one for the other. His impassioned speech drew looks around him that he was quick to apologize for as soon as he noticed, before switching to a quieter tone more becoming of a library. Ahem, pardon me. But anyway, it's been my area of study for a while, so I'm sure you can imagine my surprise when Ibaru mentioned he'd met someone who seemed to casually apply the principles of it to enchanting of all things. That's not to mention the book you wrote up for his request. I don't think surprise could begin to cover how I felt reading something that blew everything I already knew of rituals out of the water. Well, thanks. I wish I could take credit, but my god's original race apparently specialized in its use to a greater extent than any other one on the planet. I only know so much because I have him. Good resources are wonderful, but don't sell yourself short. And you said you actually participated in a ritual? If I may ask, what was it you did? So my own part in it was actually pretty small, don't let me talk myself up. I have a skill that lets me link minds with people. I used it to link up 2 awakened life mages and a very powerful earth mage to create a shell for a ruby crab who was born without one. Because of the nature of how they developed theirs, they couldn't just get a standard life mage to help, so we needed to convert Ruby into a living form first before it could be done. Fascinating, Naloth said, his eyes alight with the talk. And it just goes to show the potential of the magic. I would never have guessed it could be used in such a way. It can be convenient if you work to figure out how to apply it, Ben agreed. It's that figuring out bit that's the hardest. Speaking of, should I assume you were seeking me out because you have a particular ritual in mind? I suppose it's obvious, isn't it? He said with a laugh. Yes, I do in fact have a goal. Tell me, since you're also an enchanter, are you at all knowledgeable about gate structure? Knowledgeable was putting it mildly. Ben had read up on the subject enough that he was even sure he could reduce the mana cost of any gate so long as he could enchant with awakened skills. He was just waiting for the day it was possible. Instead of saying all of that, though, he simply nodded as Neloth's grin widened. A well-studied man. I respect that deeply. If you already have some knowledge on the matter, then that should make things easier. You understand that reality is layered. There's where we find ourselves, the one the gate network connects to, the infinite hells and the realm of gods, to name a few. But there are certainly more to go along with it. I'm simply interested in understanding what other layers there might be, as well as what use they might have, and to achieve that I plan on using ritual magic as my main tool. If you have the time, I'd love to shoot ideas back and forth for a bit. Even if nothing comes of it, a bit of brainstorming can lead to paths one might never expect. I have the time, so brainstorm away, Ben told him, wearing a wide smile of his own. The topic was not only interesting, it was one he typically didn't indulge too deeply in, along with having potential towards his goal of understanding the summoning spell, given that at least a part of it meant reaching past the boundary of reality itself. If he had someone who seemed just as passionate on the topic, he'd be a fool to turn them away. So what did you think of him? He's brilliant, Neloth sighed. I'd do anything to bring him into my fold if I could. The things we could accomplish, who cares if he can only use some obscure non-affinity branches? I feel like just letting him plan how different rituals could work and getting others to carry them out could revolutionize the world if given the chance. My project just went from something I wasn't sure I could finish to a goal that has the potential to pay off before the second wave with just a bit more refining. Well, don't covet the boy too much. Even your meeting today was a risk, and you know it. I know. I'm not such a fool as to put my hands on the apostle of a god. But you know as well as I that this was the safest time to try. Well, that's true enough, I suppose, Ibaru admitted. With all of the gods' focus directed at the things to come, it was probably the least risky time to be near an apostle. Otherwise, the odds of their thoughts being peered into was simply too great. Of course, there was always the chance for the gods to miss things, but neither one of them trusted themselves to control the things going on within their heads to such an extent. It should have been the most private area any mortal had, so almost none had the talent needed to keep things from rising to their conscious minds. For anyone with secrets such as theirs, spending too much time with an apostle of all people was nothing but a risk, even if they needed to do it at least a little, either for information like Neloth or to keep up appearances like Ibaru. Try not to worry, Neloth told him. I'm sure things are fine on my end. I'm more concerned about yours. You do have that one additional variable. Was there any reaction from her? Abras's child seemed put off, but nothing that she could put into words, so we should be fine. The fact that she felt anything really was a surprise, but she shouldn't be anywhere near the battlefield till it starts. And by then she'll be far too busy to focus on that. MMH. Blood runs deep, I suppose. Just try and take care. Ha, I've invested too much into this to fail at the end. Don't you worry. And is there anything else I can do for you while you're in town? Ibaru asked him, watching as the other stretched his neck. No, I've gotten all I can from here. I'll talk to my people, see if we can start putting some of these ideas into practice. Who knows? We may just have the world saved before your invention shows its worth. Ha! If that's the case, then I won't complain. You keep all eyes on what you're doing in the end, and then maybe I'll be able to escape the wrath of the gods. One can hope, he laughed back. Stay well, Ibaru. Try not to get caught when you're going to be the first of us with any success. Same to you. Don't get yourself killed when you're so close to achieving your goals. It was like that they parted, Neloth departing to the gate as Ibaru went through the city he called home, taking in all that Craftsman's Tower had to offer. He didn't just love his home, he loved the world as a whole. It was rich in so many ways, the diversity of life, culture, arts, and more. The very idea that there was a species out there bent on destroying all they had was like a knife twisting in his stomach. A feeling many people were left dealing with as they each had to handle what was to come in their own way. A city like that was just as good for observing the mood of the world as a whole as it was for all of the people and culture there was to offer. All around him was an oppressive atmosphere of gloom and defeat. And yet, if one only looked, they could still see the better bits of life abounding. Each day there were people who gave each other their aid, helping friends or family or even complete strangers. He could still see children out playing and couples walking arm in arm, friends with friends, and even the odd person who was just strolling with a smile on their face despite it all. And yet I can't help but wonder what people see when they look at me. Just because he was the head of the Craftsmen's Guild didn't mean his face was well known. They wouldn't see him for his position, only how he presented himself, and he hoped he was coming off as determined. Everything he did was for the world as a whole. There was no cost so great that he wouldn't pay it if he could, and with that last thought he went off to look at the price. Each day he tried to spend at least a bit of time in front of the weapon he'd worked so hard to design. It didn't have a name. It didn't need a name. All that mattered was that it would serve its purpose as he turned to the many workers scurrying around it. "How's it look? By all standards, we believe it should go off without a hitch, but it really would be best to test it, sir." "No testing. I understand your frustration, but the power source is going to be temperamental. I don't want to use it once only for it to immediately break down. We'll just activate it and pray when the time comes. So long as it stays on, we shouldn't need to worry about it shutting down for the span the gates open, and if the world wills it, we won't even need to replace it for the next one. All we need to do is ensure everything is in peak condition until then." The technician gave a nod, not happy with the order but agreeing to it nonetheless. It wasn't like Ibaru couldn't understand the man's frustration, but in the end, he and everyone else would just have to wait and hope. There was always a chance that if they activated it too soon, a watching god might understand exactly what had been built and try to put a stop to it. So long as nothing caught on to what he'd created till it had shown its worth, then they'd have no choice but to leave it be for what it could do. "I don't care if I'm tossed into the infinite hells for it. If it works like it should, then every person on the planet can villainize me for it after, as they all enjoy the long lives they'll get to have." Pages were fluttering through his fingers as Ben went from one book to the next, learning all he could in the time he had. With only 2 weeks left, he wanted to make the most of it while he could before all of the books were moved away. Information was valuable after all, and with so much of it existing near one of the invasion points, it couldn't simply be left there. Boxes were already being packed away as Ben stood among the librarians, picking out books before they could be stowed, flipping through them to gain all he could, and handing them off as they could only watch in awe at the speed he'd read at. He felt himself pushing his mind skills but couldn't help it. They were safely at the 9th level, and there was no way reading would awaken them if all he'd done to try and push both Connect and Meditation hadn't tipped either over the edge. So he ignored his headache and kept going, picking up a book and finishing it only minutes later before moving on to the next. It helped that he didn't have much else to do. Thera had been spending almost all of her time going through different gates to help Lux, while Falk was busy practicing his magic in the event that things got bad enough that he'd have to use it. Sonia, meanwhile, was spending time with Pelenia, leaving him as the only one without any way to use his time, at least in that week. Even Myriad had been too busy to chat. He knew the other gods he was acquainted with were going to be, but he really hadn't been expecting his own to have much to deal with. It had been keeping the inside of his head unusually silent, minus the unending sounds of his own thoughts filling the space as they endlessly turned over ideas, examined the things he was learning and trying to fit them together in different ways to see what fun potential existed with what he'd read. It would have been nice if Naloth had been able to stick around a bit too. "I feel like there may be a way to create an item to reduce the difficulty of using ritual magic with larger groups. I wouldn't mind someone to bounce the idea off of." He'd liked the guy enough when they talked, finding a bright mind that was good for brainstorming with, but it seemed he only had the one day free when they'd met and had to leave for his own war preparations. "And the only other person I remotely know here is Ibaru, and I can't bother him either. Okay, this is fine, I'll stick to the books." Even if he'd already spent days reading, he could do it for days more. He did still have monumental challenges to take on after all. He needed to refine his idea for making a body for Onyx, and the summoning spell was constantly on his mind as well, even if being in the Craftsmen's Guild was probably far less valuable for that line of thinking that it would be compared to going through the gate to the magic towers. But all knowledge is valuable, and I am going to actually test out the bits I can for summoning later. Who knows, maybe I'll find a gem in all of these rocks. Just gotta keep digging. "Whoa, are you okay?" Ben asked as Thera made her way to the room he was using, flopping onto his bed as he was busy cooking dinner for the two of them. Bad day at the hospitals? The system is stupid and its naming sense sucks. Well, come have some stew and tell me about it. A new skill. I wish. I finished my job, she admitted as she got up, taking a bowl and beginning to eat as she did. I had 3 new options this time, Ben. I'm literally half Earth spirit. How did I get more options for completing my life magic branch? Ha! Well, you are a fantastic healer, aren't you? Obviously, the system is just acknowledging that. So what are they? MMH, I got Homunculus Creator and Chimera Maker. Both things I only practiced with Vividus and both I was exceptionally bad at. The chimeras she had me try to put together were lucky if they survived the process, and the homunculus was basically a puddle of goop. I absolutely should have gotten more Earth magic jobs before I got something like that. Ben couldn't help but laugh as he moved beside her, rubbing her back as he did. Well, when you consider the purpose of a job is to give you an easier time raising your skills and that your Earth magic affinity is over 100, maybe the system just decided you'd be better off getting bonuses elsewhere. That is, if it does any deciding, I guess. Not really clear on that, and Myriad won't tell me. More importantly, since you very subtly didn't mention what the third one was, do you mind if I take a guess? I'd rather you didn't. The request only made his smile stretch out even wider as he leaned over and whispered in her ear, confident he was going to be correct. My beautiful life princess. Ugh, I don't want to think about it, she complained, his guess being spot on. Analia doesn't pass on succession through blood, and my father isn't a king of spirits. Why did they all have to decide that I'm their princess? To this day, not one will give me a straight answer no matter how nicely I ask. If they've gone and decided they're my subjects, then shouldn't they be telling me these things? Her complaints were lost in the sounds of Ben's laughter, him only stopping to wipe a tear from his eye after a quick elbow to the ribs. Sorry. But if it's anything like the last job, it's not bad. Right? Humph. That's why I took it, she grumbled. And since it went and leveled my spirit-empowering mana examination and mana regen, I can't complain as much as I want to. And if it gives you passive experience like the last one, then you'll be done in no time. Besides, I believe I remember a certain someone being shocked when I used to complain about the things the system gave me. Don't bring up my foolish younger self. She didn't know what she was talking about. If I ever exhaust all of my magic jobs, I'm going to start needing to train to get the Zeroth and first level in as many skills as I can to get their associated jobs to bury the options I've taken. Maybe if I get 20 more, then if anyone sees my card, there's a chance they won't immediately lock onto those 2. Those 2 so far. If you ever awaken your dark magic, I'd bet there's going to be 1 for that too. And what about your telekinesis? Do you think telekinetic princess or non-affinity princess sounds better? He teased. There's no non-affinity spirits, so I should be safe from that last one, she muttered. The fact that she couldn't argue against the potential for the dark magic job was annoying in its own way, though. Even if she didn't actively practice the magic too much, eventually it was likely she'd awaken the skill, even if it could end up taking a decade or 2 as she neglected it. Ha! Well, I'm sure you'll be happy about them eventually. Easy jobs are literally the best after all. Yeah, you're right, she said, looking to change the topic from something so embarrassing as they finished up eating, wanting to broach what had been in her thoughts for so long. So, ahem, do you have anything planned for the rest of the night? She felt a blush tinge her cheeks as she fingered at the rings that had been sitting in her pockets for days, waiting for her to gather her courage to bring up the prospect. But what she saw on his face brought the mood crashing down. Ben, what's wrong? She had asked as a simple segue to forcing herself to actually talk to him about what she wanted, but it was obvious looking at him that he did in fact have something planned, something that was weighing on his mind in a very real way as he failed to hide the emotions it brought forth in him. Nothing's really wrong. I just have a few enchanting experiments to run. Yeah? Well, your face is saying something different, so talk to me, she told him, cupping his cheeks and bringing his eyes to hers. What sort of experiment could have you looking like that? I didn't really want to bother you about it, he sighed. I mean, it's not like there's anything I can actually do about it either. I'm really just scratching at my own curiosity here is all. Ben, talk to me. The Gray's star died early. I've just got some ideas on how to progress my study on the summoning spell that I want to put into practice. The look on his face suddenly made a whole lot more sense. She'd known since they'd first learned about the fate that was going to befall that foreign world that Ben had started to look into the spell that had brought him there, just as much as she knew that while he insisted that he was doing it to indulge his own curiosity, he just didn't want to admit how instantly devoted he'd become to helping with what had seemed like an impossible goal. It was yet another thing weighing on his mind as she let her original goal slip from her own, instead resting her head on his shoulder. "All right, well, you do your work then. I'll hang out and keep you company." "You sure? It's honestly going to be extremely boring. I have some books I can read. Give me a minute to grab them and let me know if you need any help." She leaned in to kiss him before rushing off to get her stuff as Ben let himself lay back for a second before getting to work. Despite how much it can feel like the universe wants me dead, I absolutely feel like a lucky guy. What? Literally no clue what I've done to deserve that. But whatever. Don't know how long you've been watching Myriad, but you're just in time. Get Hellori so both of you can bear witness to me discovering more about the summoning spell than the gods ever have in their millennia of having it. As Thera returned, Ben gathered the main items he would need to begin to see if what he was doing was even going to be possible. Diamond sheets Thera had brought him back from Analia days prior, 100 of them each a centimeter thick and a square meter in size, all to serve one purpose: to act as a medium for the spell. Normally, magic was simply cast through the air or water depending on where the species doing it lived, but that wasn't an option for Ben. He couldn't simply fire off the spells. He needed to examine them through the lens of enchanting, yet at the same time have them structured like a regular spell instead of through any one of the enchanting systems he was aware of. To combat those limitations, what he'd come up with was the idea of creating slices of the spell at a time on a sheet before holding them all together and letting mana pass through it all to see what the outcome would be, essentially holding the spell within a solid. It was an excellent workaround to the issue in the difficulty of testing it, though it had some flaws. One of which was that the summoning spell didn't just incorporate mana, but faith as well, though he was sure that he and the gods could calculate the difference at the end of things. The far bigger issue was just how much time it was going to take to test every section. The summoning spell was big, unreasonably big. When he'd first looked at it, he thought it was roughly the size of a large house, and that opinion still stood. He'd thought it had been such a good idea when he'd gotten Myriad to cut it into pieces for him, but that forced him to consider an aspect he hadn't had to before: volume. By dividing the entire thing into cubic meters, he'd been left with an altogether ridiculous number of 8,100 to have to look through, with many more to go. His only saving grace was that there didn't seem to be any of the same sort of detail work he'd seen on Galwax's trial after his mana examination had improved. Everything that there was within his current ability to replicate with his enchanting, meaning he wasn't going to need to further subdivide it all just for his tests. But I'm still looking at what? Months or years of work if I focus exclusively on that. I'll at least in theory be able to cut down on time a bit if I can confirm any of the numerous effects. But they're still testing how everything works together, and after I finish testing the bits I'll need to go and combine them into their 2 by 2 meter sections to be sure nothing changes too much as they interact with each other, and from there make 4 by 4 meter sections, and by that point, the mana cost is going to be ridiculous, especially when you consider the fact that I'm already going to need to be using a bunch of rainbow mana crystal for the smaller sections to power it and see how it turns out, and this is really going to be so much work, isn't it? Hellori scoffed in his head. There are no unsolvable questions, especially if it's possible to get an answer through brute force. Anyway, Hellori, since your wonderful, talented, hardworking student is going to have his hands full enough with just this, can you watch from your end and try to estimate where and how faith would affect the bits I'm testing based on the results I get? You'll accept me one day, maybe today after you see just how well this goes. And with that last back and forth, he finally got started. With all of his magic rings on his fingers, Ben began what he needed to, grabbing his first sheet and placing his hands on it, using his connect to create dots and patches of magic throughout it with his enchanting. Some sections being pure mana of whatever affinity it represented, others having the mana mixed and blended in ways reminiscent of ritual magic and his blending system, only in precise quantities that were meant to achieve goals he couldn't begin to imagine. It was comparatively simple work, even if it did require a bit of care to ensure the placement of it all was correct, and as he finished the first one he moved on to the next and the one after it and so on, with all 100 taking just over an hour to complete between ensuring everything went down correctly and letting his mana regenerate as need be. From there he lined each sheet up, making sure all of the edges were flush before he used his material skill, gently blending the sides to keep everything in place without damaging what he'd already done as he looked at the way the mana would move through what he had set up, constructing yet more enchantments to activate at the endpoints. He would need to test all of the affinities to be sure they wouldn't react in different ways, but to start he used what he was sure would be safe. Barrier magic, specifically an enchantment built onto each endpoint of the Mana's flow, with the barrier not being enchanted in any of the ways he normally would in order to let him see how it would be affected in its purest form. With that setup, he moved to attach bits of rainbow mana crystal to each starting point, letting the bound spell take in the mana each crystal stored as it moved through the strange and unusual paths created in the enchantments till it reached the barriers, as each of them exhibited a different effect. Perhaps it wasn't correct to say each of them considering that some simply didn't activate, but that was still a result in itself as Ben took different notes of what had happened in each area, making down the changes he could see. It was early enough in his research that he couldn't begin to determine why some of the enchantments were stronger or weaker as he poked at them or hammered his finger against them, let alone any of the stranger effects. In at least 3 areas, the enchantment had taken on properties he hadn't built it to have, being either warm to the touch, the color changing from a translucent grayish-white to a souled blue, and one where it had taken a property that he'd never been able to achieve through his own efforts, the barrier bending under his finger, the rigidity of the spell completely lost as it felt more like cling wrap, yet not breaking as he tried to push through. "Okay, I extra want to figure out why that one happened," he muttered to himself, imagining a future of impenetrable barrier outfits before getting back on track. There was a lot more to test after all, and once he'd finished recording everything he'd seen to the greatest level of detail, he removed the mana crystals and destroyed the barrier enchantments, replacing them with Dark for as the very visual Dark spell activated with its effects as he continued through each affinity. Well, that's a decent start, he told himself as he flipped through his notes for the first block. Even if he didn't know what was happening yet, he'd gotten some interesting results. While a few of the sections that hadn't worked the first time had for later ones, many of them continued to do nothing, telling him that they must have needed some of the following bits to show their worth, but the more interesting ones were the 3 that had altered the barrier. For each other section, those areas had shown equally unusual changes for the spells of other affinities, telling him that there was something going in the area's mana passed through as he took detailed notes of the particular flow for each, wanting to go back and study the results in detail to see if the changes would still exist if he mimicked those particular parts or if they were dependent on the greater whole. Beyond that, whether areas would be strengthened, weakened, or display how he'd expected would vary, while a few of each affinity didn't seem to activate at all in sections that had been fine for the others. There were also a couple that were consistently stronger or weaker no matter the spell attached, so that could be worth looking into deeper as well. Is it a way to enhance the effects, or is it a coincidence? Maybe some mana is moving from weaker sections to stronger ones to give the spell a little more oomph? This is only block 1, so hopefully after a few more, I'll have a better idea. Hellori told him dryly. What other choice do I have? Hopefully, after testing a dozen or so, I'll be able to start making predictions on how sections should act, and if I get good enough at making predictions, then just maybe I won't need to test them all and can just figure it out with the information I have. Besides Miss Magic Goddess, there's no way you can say you aren't interested. Okay, well, no need to be a defeatist about it. I have Myriad to watch too, so you both can split your time, and it's not like you need to watch the setup, just the results. Myriad cut in, leaving Ben to shrug. Then bring in some other magic gods. Nair too, he's a god of crafting and challenge, right? The spell is basically a piece of magic craftsmanship, and I can't imagine anything much more challenging than figuring it out. Plus, let me remind you that you're all just estimating the effects of faith on the bits you're seeing. I'm the sucker putting the rest of it together. Now come on. Complaining never gets anything done, and I want to do one more tonight. He ignored the grumbling in his head as he turned to his girlfriend, seeing Thera passed out in his bed with a book in her hands as a tiny bit of guilt gnawed at him. He couldn't let this project consume him when either of them could be dead in a couple weeks. After the night was up, he'd be sure to exclusively work on it when he knew she would be going to sleep. 7 days. He'd squeezed in as much time at the library as he could, but he'd reached the point where their packing up was done, leaving his time there finished. It had been plenty valuable, but he couldn't help but wish he'd gotten more as he made his way through the crowded streets. They'd finally reached the day that various foreign armies were pouring in, each getting ready to set up at the section of the invasion points they were meant to cover, while many of the remaining citizens began their departure, going through the gate to safer areas in cities that had spent the last year rapidly expanding to host the refugees if they had no other place they could join up with. Of course, not all of them were leaving, at least not immediately. With war came opportunity, and there were more than a few merchants and businesses that were staying set up for as long as they could, hoping to make whatever bit of cash was available from the soldiers and other groups that had come to fight in the last bit of downtime they'd have. Ben, for his part, had something different in mind as he and his teacher carried planks to the edge of the city's limits, the area everyone would need to pass as they made their way to the invasion point or else where they'd be resting. "Here okay, boy? Yeah, it should be good. Sure you don't want to stick around? I respect the bit of charity you're looking to do, and maybe it would be better if I helped, but I've got a selfish streak to me. Gonna meet up with some old friends before it's too late. Of course, I can help you finish setting up if you want. No, I've got this, go have your fun. Make sure you tell them about your precious apprentice who you absolutely adore. Yeah. Don't be surprised if a bit more work ends up your way since you're doing this. It's basically what I'm here for, so whatever. Later, Falk." As his teacher left, he got to work, pulling out a hammer, saw, and some nails to quickly throw together a simple stand for him to work at, before pulling out some black paint to make 2 signs to display exactly what he was doing there. "Free enchantments for armor and weapons from the Church of Myriad. The Apostle is in. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Hey, I'm just trying to do the good I can, and since I have the time, why not? Besides, I doubt I'll be getting too many people. And why's that? Wait, what?" Before his god could say any more, though, his thoughts were pulled away by the sound of pounding feet coming his way as he saw a massive crowd of people making a beeline at him, making what he expected to be a pretty slow time look like it would end up infinitely fuller than he imagined as he yelled out the moment they all reached him. "I'll get to all of you, so form a proper line." He didn't know how many hours it had been of constant enchanting, with the sheer mass of people making him have to reevaluate how he'd planned on doing it. Originally, he'd been expecting to talk potential enchantments over with each person, trying to collectively decide what would help them the most, but with it stretching into the distance with no end in sight, he had to modify it for the sake of having the slightest hope of getting everything done. Instead, he mentally planned general enchantments that would be useful for the people coming his way, with all armors getting a collection of his resistances attached to them, as well as various defensive skills mixed in as well, some of them found within his own status. Aside from that, he made sure to shake hands or equivalent appendages with all who'd come to him, not just to see if they had any skills worth making rings from, but also to get a feel for what they had before he enchanted their weapons, not wanting to add anything that could weaken their growth rates in such a pressing time, meaning that those were the areas he needed to get at least a little creative as he mentally prepared a general set and adjusted it before laying it down to match what the user would need. Since everything was going to the tools of common soldiers, that also meant almost none of them were built with mana crystals or mithril, leaving everything just a little weaker than it could have been to match the user's need to supply it themselves, yet not taking so much mana as to put them in a precarious spot if an emergency came up. It felt like he was walking a tightrope trying to make everything perfect, knowing that there'd be cases where how he chose to balance things would be the difference between life and death. But despite all of that, he still worked quickly. The 32 minds in his head were devoted to the task, all of them working simultaneously to put the enchantments down so he could move on to the next person, and then the one after and so on in an unending stream. And for all of his work, he only asked for a single thing. A prayer for Myriad, just one, both to make his god happy and because there was nothing else he wanted to take. Even that request was really an afterthought too. He was doing this because he could. It was his little bit of charity to the world that had given him a second chance at life, regardless of how things had turned out after. It was only as he started what felt like his untold 100th enchantment that he stopped, the feeling of something cold pressed against his cheek breaking his focus as he jumped back, finding Ibaru holding out a bottle with a smile on his face. "I have to say, when I agreed to let you do this, I wasn't expecting it to turn out like this," he laughed. "Not that I'm complaining. I appreciate the work, so drink up. Oh, thanks. What is it? Ben asked as he took the bottle, giving it a smell and finding it to not be the most appetizing thing he could put to his nose. Mana regeneration potion, the best I could get my hands on. If you're going to be doing all of this, then I don't want you falling into mana exhaustion. Oh, sweet. In that case, down the hatch. He chugged it back, finding the flavor was at best medical but put up with it. If his mana could regenerate faster for a few hours after drinking it, then he could work faster, meaning he could get even more done. Ha, and since it seems like this might keep up if nobody puts an end to it, I've sent someone to the far back of the line to keep more from joining today. Do you think you'll be doing more tomorrow, or has all of this scared you off? I'll be doing it for another 5 or 6 days, don't worry. I'm going to get everything I can done. Falk really does have an excellent apprentice. Alright, in that case, I'll make sure to send somebody a couple hours earlier than this each day to put an end to the line though. As things stand, I don't think you'll be finishing till the middle of the night. Yeah, that's what I get for not actually planning things through. It's fine, it will be fine. Ha, I'll have more potions sent as well. Having said that, do you mind if I ask one more favor of you when you're already doing so much? Well, you can at least ask. I'm not going to pretend it's not a lot, but I was hoping that when you finish up these enchantments you might make some job crystals. Given the amount of experience we can expect to be going around in the next month, we're going to want people to be able to change theirs as fast as possible, but there was never going to be enough considering they need to be made by people with connections to gods. And since you're conveniently here, I got you, I'll do it. How many are you thinking? I have 100 crystals ready to be enchanted. Ooh boy, okay. That combined with all of my enchanting, combined with summoning spell research, combined with still making time for Thera when she's done helping Lux each day, and also going into the archive for an hour each night to see if meditating for days in my exhausted state will push me over the edge. Definitely going to be burning the candle at both ends. I'm pretty sure I can manage about 3 hours a night. I will need some wake-up calls though. As his god droned on about how he needed to take care of himself, he focused back on Ibaru. All right, I'm your enchanter. If you keep me supplied with potions, then I can multitask and work on the crystals while I'm doing all of these enchantments too, so if you can get your hands on even more, I'll make as many as I can. Worst to worst, you can send any extras off to other invasion points, right? Hearing that, the troll couldn't keep the warm look from his face. If you're willing to do so much, then I won't decline. Thank you, Ben. It's nice to see someone working so hard for the world. I'm just doing the bit I can. Don't worry about it. That's the 800th job crystal, and with that, I'm finally done. Not only had he made an outrageous number of job crystals in the days since he'd been asked, he'd completed an uncountable number of enchantments for armors and weapons, to the point that he wouldn't be shocked if he was close to leveling his skill again. It had certainly had an effect on his job level, the sheer volume of enchanting he'd been forcing himself to do each day giving him a mountain of experience, even if he wasn't enjoying the many other aspects of crafting, nor indulging in anything that would go towards the sacrilege part of his job. Hey now, don't act like it didn't work out for you at all. You've gotten a lot of prayers. That's fair enough. I'm pretty sure I'm too exhausted for any of the usual nightmares anyway, so some proper sleep feels like it would do me some good. But for now, time to enjoy the good bits of mortal life. He left the job crystals he'd made with the employee Ibaru had stationed with him as he made his way back to the embassy. It was late afternoon, not quite yet evening, as well as the earliest he'd been done in days. But there was a reason for that as he went to wash up and change before heading to the gate, making his way to Analia. Unlike Craftsman's Tower, the homeland of the succubi was mostly the same. No armies were there to help considering that Abris was able to deal with the first wave by himself, meaning that there was no need for anyone to evacuate. There was of course the same feeling of gloom and doom that engulfed the world as a whole, but there were still people out living their lives instead of streets filled with people prepared to lay their own down, giving the place a marginally better feeling as he made his way to the Queen's home, off to enjoy what had the potential to be his last meal with Thera and her family. He was let through the front entrance, the guards recognizing him from his previous visits as he stood briefly at the front door, slapping his face to try and get rid of some of the exhaustion that clung to him before putting on the best smile he could as if it was a mask to wear as he made his way to the dining room, finding everyone else already there and in their own conversations. "Ah, took you long enough, boy," his teacher called out. I was telling you, you should have stopped with that yesterday. You've done more than enough as is. Probably, but I still have plenty more in me. You know? He said back confidently, feeling tired enough to collapse as he took a seat beside Thera as she leaned over, giving him a kiss on the cheek and drawing a few cheers from the others there, while he could only look back in surprise. I already told my parents about us, she said shyly, just trying to let them get used to knowing. And I'm still hurt to be the last to know, Pelania pouted. I want compensation. Name my first grandchild after me. I deserve it. Thera shot her mother a dirty look as Pelania returned it with a confused one, quickly changing to understanding as a grin formed on her face from the silent exchange. Of course, who knows when I'll need to worry about that, the queen laughed. So many steps one can take to put that sort of thing off after all. Ahem. So I see we're missing a couple? Ben said, trying to change the topic to keep Pelania from antagonizing her daughter too much. Where are Carly and Glob off to? The table was filled with Lux and her family, along with Thera, Pelania, Abris, Sonia, and Falk, but he'd been expecting the other summon to be there as well, along with the Great Spirit Funa. It wasn't like the table felt empty without them, but he had been hoping to see them, just in case it was going to be the last time. Oh, they're both meeting with old friends right now, Abris explained, and Funa's standing by her gate. Ah, fair enough. They all had people to see, it made sense they'd want to one more time. It wasn't like he didn't either really, but both Will and Steph were kept busy by their nations and Amy, Jake, and Yuzu were likely indulging in their time together on the final day. But we aren't thinking about it. All of them tried to avoid touching on what was so clearly at the front of their minds as the meal eventually came out, instead talking about nothing. None of them wanted to focus on the unavoidable, so instead they simply spoke about life. Ben told them all about a few of his more interesting projects that didn't weigh so heavily on his mind as Thera talked about the friendships she'd been growing and developing in the past year, giving her parents no end of joy to hear about their daughter connecting with other people. Pelania teased her sister, ever so gently implying that something should happen with Falk as Sonia in return mercilessly silenced her, and both Lux and Rit were happy to gush about Saren's growth, the toddler joining the conversation to the small extent he could, and managing to be the only one who didn't have to fake things, genuinely enjoying the attention he received without having to consider what the future held. For just a moment, Ben was able to enjoy it all, just indulging in the company of people he loved without the thought of their demise filling his head as the hours passed in peace until they eventually had to bring things to an end. Are you sure you don't want to stay? Pelania asked as he and Thera prepared to head back. It's not like we don't have the space. Your room is always going to be open, Thera. Thanks, Mom. But I think it will be a bit easier if we're already there in the morning. Besides, I think I need the walk back. Oh well, if you're sure. Reaching out, Pelania pulled her daughter into a tight hug, her face slipping when Thera couldn't see it, but eventually making herself let go before moving to hug Ben as well. Now, you make sure you take extra good care of my daughter, understood? Yes, ma'am, don't worry. I'm pretty sure I act like a bad luck magnet, so as long as I'm close by, anything that would be going to her should end up hitting me instead. You know, that's not actually reassuring. Thera, take care of Ben. I like the boy that broke down your walls too much to want to have to talk to Carly about human funeral customs. Don't worry. I've been working so hard on my life magic specifically to get better at putting him back together. Also not reassuring. Alright, both of you have a good night. Maybe even a very good night, Pelania told them, giving a final wink before going back in and leaving the two of them to walk back to the gate. He could see Thera blushing, both of them having picked up on the implication as they went back and tried to ignore it, instead wanting to squeeze just a little more joy out of the night that they could. There wasn't much to say that hadn't already been said, so they simply enjoyed the company one another provided as they went, Thera eventually shaking off her mother's comment enough to wrap her arms around his own, holding him tight like he might vanish otherwise as they enjoyed the stars coming down, first in Analia, and then later Craftsman's Tower as they passed through the gate, the time change not being too severe as they ended up gaining an hour comparatively. Hey, does this world have any constellations? Ben asked out of the blue, wanting to talk about anything and taking the first question that came to mind. Maybe? I'd need to know what those are. Patterns in the stars with stories attached. I didn't use the English word, so since Allspeak has an equivalent there must be some. Maybe it's just not a succubus thing. There are enough places to have their own customs here, she agreed, feeling curious with the subject brought up. So is that a human thing then? Tell me about them. Ah, I wish there was more I could tell. I don't really know the history of them or even what cultures they originate from on Earth, and there's only 2 I would actually be able to find in the sky when I think there's a few dozen. Well, those 2 must be pretty important then. Important probably isn't the right word for it. They were easy to see in my part of the world. One was called the Big Dipper and the other was Orion's Belt. Still, there was something comforting about being able to look into a clear night sky and point them out. He felt himself start to reminisce, only for the feeling to immediately be broken by the sounds of giggling coming from beside him. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be laughing. Are those exactly what they sound like? A belt and a scoop. I mean, yes. Her laughter only grew with the answer. Sorry. I don't know why that's so funny to me. Did this Orion person do anything significant with either of them to make them worth remembering in the stars? Ha, well, only the belt is Orion's. I think he actually has an entire constellation with it, but I only know what the belt looks like. The Dipper also represents an animal from my world as well, I think. Maybe a bear? Though I have no clue why it's 2 things. Still, it's fun. He wasn't sure if she'd even heard that last bit. She was laughing too hard by the end before she got herself under control and leaned up to kiss him. You know, it's funny. After meeting a bunch of other humans, I thought they all seemed pretty normal. But when you tell me things like that, I can't help but think your world is filled with weirdos like you. You'll need to tell me even more in the future. Okay? Absolutely. I'm basically an encyclopedia of half-remembered Earth lore. I'll tell you all sorts of things that probably won't make sense without context that I simply can't provide. Good. I'll look forward to it. It hadn't been his intent, but such a small question did wonders for their moods as they took a break from walking back to look up at the night sky. Getting back to his room, he had to force himself to change before flopping into bed. The thin thread of consciousness he'd been holding onto for the night desperately trying to slip away from his grasp after so many days of constant work, only for him to have to squeeze it tight as he heard a knock on his door and forced himself to get up, finding Thera on the other side. Hey, she said, seeming far more awake than he was before focusing on his face. Sorry, I didn't think you were so tired. You look rough. I don't look that bad, he said in his defense as he did his best to rub the sleep from his eyes. You look like you might pass out where you're standing. Well, I always have the energy for you, so what's up? Or could you just not resist this handsome face? I want... She trailed off, knowing how he'd been pushing himself and not wanting him to die for it if she kept him up any longer. To make sure you're going to actually go to sleep. Tomorrow's a big day, so I'm staying with you. Not going to take any complaints on the matter either. When have I ever complained about being with you? Come on in, I'd love the company. She was already entering before he'd said it and made her way to his bed, getting comfortable as he slipped in beside her, wrapping his arms around her as she rested her head on his chest. Ben. Yeah. You aren't allowed to do anything crazy tomorrow. Okay? I'd really prefer you didn't get yourself killed. Don't worry. When have I ever done anything crazy? And you're definitely not allowed to say stuff like that. Most of what you do is crazy. Ha, well, you don't need to worry. It looks like I might not even be able to get my hands on Ibru's weapon with all of the other enchanters he has around, so I'm basically just a spectator. I should be able to comfortably stick by your side as you're taking your potshots. Okay, good, she sighed, sounding just a little more at ease as she leaned up, placing her lips against his own. I really love you. I know, I really love you too. Through the combination of his exhaustion and having Thera there in his arms, he was able to drift off to a very comfortable sleep. No thoughts of the future there to trouble his mind. His rest was blissfully peaceful, his mind and body both too exhausted to have time for dreams or nightmares as he opened his eyes, still feeling Thera in his arms as the first rays of dawn were beginning to make their way through his window. I guess I've just gotten used to not sleeping very long, he thought with a small yawn as he faced the reality of the day. In a matter of hours, the gates would open and all hell would pour out. In the smallest bit of personal luck, he at least had the benefit that there would be sunlight in the area he was when it happened, even if there'd only be a couple hours of it left. With invasion points all around the world, there'd be plenty of people having to start their battles in the dark, and even if they all would have to eventually, as what was sure to be a long month rolled on, he didn't want to have to begin things in such a manner. Even awake, though, he didn't want to get up to face the day. He wanted to lounge in bed with Thera as if that would put off what the future held. But he suppressed that impulse to do something else as he let her rest, instead closing his eyes again to force his mind to his god's realm, arriving to find both Myriad and Hellori deep in their work when he got there. Neither god noticed his arrival as images and characters kept popping up in front of them in a flurry before disappearing again. Information spreading and being shared out as they all prepared for whatever they could while Ben was content to sit and watch in silence, waiting to be noticed instead of bringing attention to himself as Myriad finally picked up on him as the minutes passed. "Ben, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be preparing for the day? What's there for me to prepare? Besides, is it really so surprising I might want to see you?" he asked with a wry smile as the cube seemed momentarily surprised. "No, of course not. Sorry, I'm glad you came. I can spare a 10-minute break." "And so can I," Hellori joined in. "So many hours of constant work. I think we deserve a small break." The work of the two gods vanished in a flash, leaving the three of them to each other's company, though none really knew what to say. They were about to enter the easiest wave, the one that no one doubted they'd overcome, and yet it was undeniable that people would still die in it. Lots of people, maybe ones Ben cared about, maybe even himself depending on how things turned out. It was Hellori who broke the silence, hopping from her usual place atop his god to stomp her foot. "Enough of the doom and gloom. Even if we'll be busy, Myriad and I will have our eyes on you when we can, and this is the most powerful any people have ever been before this, so stop thinking about it when nothing's even happened yet." "Just try to be positive," Myriad agreed. "As nice as it is to see you taking things seriously, you can only do the best you can." "Ha! Don't worry. I haven't gone and given up on life. It's just hard to keep the mood from setting in," he told them, before letting himself get a little more serious. "Still, just in case I get hit by a stray spell on the first day and die embarrassingly fast, I should probably say this now. Ben, you don't dash. Myriad, thank you for everything," he said, bowing to his friend and god. "When I thought I might die in the trial, I regretted not saying it enough, but without you, I wouldn't be where I am right now. Even if I don't always show it, I want you to know I'm always grateful to have you in my life. And Hellori, it's been fun. Thanks for taking the time to answer my questions and brainstorm with me on my projects. You've been an excellent teacher and I appreciate it." Both gods were quiet, neither of them expecting the sincere display of emotions from him. They were used to the feeling of mortals giving them their love, but what Ben was conveying wasn't the feelings of someone talking to a higher power, but instead words to what he really saw them as, friends. It was a far rarer feeling for them to receive, and for that all the more touching as he stopped to clear his throat. "Well, anyway, I just wanted to pop up to say that, just to be on the safe side, but I don't want to distract you, so enjoy suffering through your work. I need to get started on the day." And like that, before either god could stop to convey their own feelings, he vanished from the realm, forcing his mind back into his resting body to get up and begin all he had to. After preparing the best breakfast he could with the ingredients on hand, both he and Thera walked through the city, trying to reach their destination. The average citizen was gone now, while in their place the town was filled with adventurers, ready to take on any beast that got too close to the gate network or the many rest areas people would be staying in, the embassy included. He and Thera were going to be the only ones using it in that time, receiving the keys as the regular staff evacuated and having the entire place to themselves for the month to come, but there were other buildings that would host who they could, as well as a shelter for healers that was close enough to the battlefield for any major cases, yet far enough that they wouldn't be trapped in the thick of things. Both of them seeing all of this as they passed the city's edge to get their eyes on everything else that had changed. The biggest one being just how busy each nation's earth mages must have been, along with any extra help that had finally come through after working to get other cities defended. A wall had gone up on the side of the city that faced the invasion point, maybe 12 feet high, to act as a simple deterrent from any demons set on making their way in. During the first wave, it would only be the non-sapient stage of them in the end after all. The chances of that being enough to put off many of them wasn't slim. In a similar vein were the heavily defended areas that each nation had prepared, small fortresses that individuals could retreat to if the need arose, as soldiers would be on a constant rotation, with hours of fighting making way for lighter bits of treatment and whatever small rest they could receive through it all as the two of them pushed through the crowd to get where they needed to be, at the Weapon of Ibaru. Originally, it had been on a similar ground level as any of the forts, but it looked like that had been changed last minute. The area it sat on raised up into a small hill, giving them a perfect view of the ground around them, letting them see the soldiers adding the finishing touches to their designated area before they all would stand ready for whatever was to come. It wasn't like the weapon was all they had to rely on after all. Each nation had filled their own designation areas with whatever traps they could to take off whatever brute they could from the warriors beneath them, even if it would never be enough. Ben could see pitfalls with illusions being placed over them to claim all they could. An area laced with spikes he had to assume were either poisoned or enchanted, and more that he wouldn't be able to identify until it was all activated, each one ready and snare any careless demons that entered their range. As he couldn't help but think aloud. Makes you wonder if they know what they're coming into, doesn't it? Are they aware that this world has been waiting so long for their arrival? Or do they think it's going to be like any other conquest in the past? Doesn't matter, his teacher said, walking up beside them without either noticing, both being too lost in the sight before their eyes. It's not going to be enough. If records and the gods are right, then they'll just keep pushing through. Any trap will be buried under a mountain of bodies as the rest just keep climbing over, and it wouldn't be shocking if by the end of this first day armies retreat to their forts and take shots from there, letting most demons run by to kill the ones they can. Cheery, Ben said dryly, not able to take his eyes off things. So how long to go? A couple hours. Mages will fire a signal off into the sky at an hour, 10 minutes, and 1 minute. The only positive of having so many worlds being invaded in the past is that we know to the second when that thing will open up. How are you two feeling? Like I was really lucky to be asleep for my first violent death, Ben told him, the tone coming off far darker than he meant it to. A little scared, honestly, Thera admitted. Is Auntie around? Here, Sonia called out, jogging up beside them with her hands full as she handed a bar of something wrapped in paper out to each of them. Sorry, had to wait in line for this. Make sure not to eat it till we're past the 10-minute mark. Sure. But why? What is it? He asked as he looked it over. Since she'd said that, it was obviously food, but he didn't know anything beyond that, nor why they were getting it at all. Food from the divine chef, Falk explained, giving it a smell. I hear she's been working on making as much as she could since before the invasion points were marked. You could almost consider yourself lucky to get to try this. If it wasn't for the war, then you'd probably go your full life without getting a bite from her. And she is? A person with a third-tier cooking skill. I don't know about everything that went into it when it got there, but one thing that merged into it was a tier 2 light magic. That little bar of food will likely leave you buffed for a couple days after eating it, and a powerful buff too. I'm honestly surprised they're being distributed for the first wave. She must have made an absolute mountain of things if it's not all being saved for the second and third. Interesting. It was the fourth of the tier 3 skill holders he was now aware of, along with the 2 soul mages and the true shifter, and he would have wanted to know significantly more if it weren't for the present circumstances. When he'd been told about them, he'd assumed that most would fighters. The fact that someone held a tier 3 cooking skill left him infinitely more curious on the matter. But it was a curiosity that could wait. He didn't want to be distracted by stray thoughts, so he put every level of his focus to use, many minds examining the situation around them as a few locked onto the people he was with. All right, so are we just standing off to the side while things go down then? Ha, not exactly off to the side. Just don't get in the way of the folks who actually built the weapon unless something's gone very wrong. Sonia and Thera, are you both feeling ready for some long days of healing/guard duty? Of course, Sonia told him, giving the Yeti a smile. Just like old times, right? Maybe even smoother than old times without Pell around to cause any unnecessary chaos. And I should be able to fight fine from here, Thera said confidently. You'll both get to see the earth magic I've worked so hard on put into action. Ha, well, just keep an eye on flyers, Falk told her. Those will be the biggest threat to deal with where we are. Otherwise, all we can do is wait. Which is the worst part. There really was uncomfortably little for them to do in the time they had. So they made the small bits of chit-chat they could, each of them feeling as every single minute ticked by. Everyone watched as balls of fire flew into the sky, almost like fireworks, only to signal the coming deaths of untold thousands. 10 minutes to go. One of his minds switched to doing a countdown while the rest just focused on the world around them as he pulled out the bar of food he was given, taking off the paper to give it a look. If he didn't know better, he would have thought it was chocolate, with its dark color and glossy appearance, only to see how wrong he was as he took his first bite, and despite the situation they were in, felt his eyes light up. It was rich but not sweet, with flavors coating his mouth and constantly shifting as a feeling of power came over him, the buffs from it permeating his body to fill it with strength. He couldn't even begin to guess how it had been made, but desperately wanted to know if he ever got the chance. Even if he couldn't fill his food with power, he at least wanted to recreate the flavor as every feast or holiday meal he'd ever gotten to enjoy in the past flashed through his mind, all while parts of him watched those in the surrounding area go through the same thing. As the reason they must have been distributed in the first wave became clear. It wasn't just for the extra power each person would receive, it was a way to break the tension. He didn't think he was wrong to say that some good food could make any situation a little easier, and what he was experiencing wasn't just good, it was incredible. He'd been letting himself feel smug occasionally with how good his own cooking had been ever since he'd awoken his crafting. But between seeing what his teacher could forge and now trying the food of a Tier 3 cook when it was clearly a mass-produced ration, he couldn't help but feel humbled in how far he could still grow if given the chance. He continued to nibble on it, savoring each bite as minutes passed while everyone around did the same, happy to indulge in that brief respite from their thoughts as much as they could before they all finished, going back to focusing on the point with weapons in hand, even if the general atmosphere felt just a little calmer than it had. For minutes left, without any real thought going to the act, Ben reached out, taking Thera's free hand in his own, watching her as her eyes were glued to the point before turning to look at the others with him, many of them looking the same. It was only those who were in charge of the weapon who seemed to have pushed away the world, fully devoted to doing their final checks as they prepared to activate it. Each of them desperate for it to go off without a hitch, all of them wanting to see their work paying off and saving the world if they could prove its viability, with the resources to make a dozen more already prepared, while what they truly wanted was one for every gate, with how it turned out for the first wave being the deciding factor in that. He could see Ibaru among them, the head of the whole project, looking like every muscle in his large body was tense, with him having more invested in the weapon than anyone else. It was the culmination of his life's work, and he was about to have to see if all of those years had been wasted in the end. 2 minutes. His minds felt more attentive than they ever had before, even with the 32 at his disposal entirely focused on the world around him as time continued to tick down. It felt like each moment was slowing to a crawl from it, and he had to force himself to ensure he was still counting properly. Even if keeping track of the seconds himself didn't truly do any good. He wanted to know, wanted to be aware of every single one before the world changed forever, as he felt Thera's grip on his hand tighten. Despite the thousands upon thousands of people present, the area was shockingly quiet. Nobody able to say a word as they were forced to confront themselves before they'd have to confront the wave. Those moments leaving everyone's minds filled with words left unsaid, things left undone and actions never taken. Aside from the summoned, every person on that world had spent their lives hearing about the monsters that would be making their way to their home, coming for nothing but a mindless slaughter and conquest, with hundreds of known victories under their belts and likely thousands of unknown ones. It wasn't like every world was going to have survivors after all. It could be said that the one they were currently on was filled with the lucky ones whose races at least had the smallest bit of hope. They knew what was coming compared to their ancestors who'd had to face it blindly. They and their gods had been planning for the day for centuries, with their civilization far advanced compared to where most of the worlds had been invaded at, even if a few had declined, and even if every demon in the universe would get access to the system the moment the gates opened, they hadn't had their whole lives to take advantage of it. They would benefit, but the people of the world had thrived under it to reach heights in strength and power unimaginable to their ancestors. And with their growth in strength and the union of both gods and men that never would have met if not for the disaster that had befallen their old homes, they'd grown in knowledge as well. Weapons technology incomparable to the sticks and stones many had to wield in the past, with systems of enchantments refined to the point that items were enhanced far beyond their base potential, letting them deal unseen amounts of damage compared to what one could do in the past. And that was only beginning to touch on the growth of magic. There were more mages than ever before, most people even having one branch as their blessed skill, as the people who pursued the craft had refined the primitive ways mana was previously used into an art form, creating spells that no individual before could have achieved in their quest for growth, as all of them learned what they could and passed it on to future generations, letting knowledge pile up and continue to be built upon until it reached its current state as people held their staves at the ready, already grasping the mana within themselves to let loose at a moment's notice. 1 minute. The balls of fire shooting up into the sky told him that his counting had remained true as the tension that had fallen came back in full force while he felt his heart pound. The entire reason he was even in that universe was before his eyes as untold gods were watching down and an entire other world looked on from across the primordial chaos that separated realities, just as invested in their success. Every gray was watching what was about to take place, letting them temporarily forget their own troubles as most of them were locked on to the representatives of their own kind who'd been brought to the world, the only members of their race who had a chance of surviving their world's eventual cold end, though a few looked elsewhere. There were many interesting individuals after all, and as a universe that had received more attention than any other for how it had reached out across the gap into so many others, people couldn't help but get invested in what they saw. As each second passed, Ben could feel his pulse rising, getting to the point where he thought his heart might just burst altogether as he took one last look at Thera beside him before putting his eyes squarely on the light beaming into the sky, acting as a call signal for what was to come. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. By the end, the countdown slipped out of him, and with the final word came a change to what they were seeing, the invasion point no longer being a beam of light, nor a tear in space like he'd usually see with that branch of magic. Instead, it looked like a fractal tube stretching into the sky, still as large as it had been only moments before but now showing snippets of 1,000 different worlds as it finally began. The gate opened up and pandemonium poured out. That very first second made it clear why the event was described as a wave. There was no lead up to it. The moment the gate was opened, a flood of demons poured out, crushing each other in their haste to get through to spread chaos and destruction wherever they could as all the traps that had been set up showed their futility. It wasn't that they hadn't worked. The second the demons came through, they couldn't escape them, the rush of oncoming bodies pushing the ones at the front into them, keeping them from avoiding even if they wanted to as the beasts were burned, crushed, ripped to shreds and otherwise killed. No, the problem was that his teacher had been correct. With everything going off, more and more were simply piled on top until the effects of them vanished, with thousands being killed in that mad dash but serving as a barrier against each one for the later monsters that came through. And monsters they were. Ben had known in theory that the bodies of demons were diverse, only sharing their scales and eyes, but he hadn't expected just how diverse as creatures that were mostly claws and mouths came through, a giant larger than an elephant from his homeworld. Things with what looked like misshapen or uneven limbs came out, even if they were sure to have some yet unseen benefit, and many more. If it wasn't for their unifying factors, then anyone would have doubted they came from the same race, as they even killed each other to get just a little bit further, pushing to the front lines as each soldier stood at the ready while mages cast their spells from the distance, delivering whatever extra bit of death they could. Seeing it all conveyed a single emotion: hopelessness. In seconds, the otherworldly beasts already sacrificed enough of their kind to mark a mass tragedy, without a hint of slowing down. Ben could clearly imagine how every person at each of the invasion points must have been feeling. It was only the one he was stationed at that got to trade it for a bit of hope, as Ibaru got to prove the worth of what he'd spent so much time and energy on. With the enchanters rushing to finish whatever final bits of setup there was, the weapon went online, firing out a solid beam of black mana and hitting the ground right before where the strange gate had opened, showing an instantaneous effect as it did. It all but polluted the area with its violent spell and displayed all of the power it was outputting on the unwitting creatures rushing out as they stepped into it. It was the immediate loss of momentum, the crashing to the ground as they lost all strength in their muscles, being crushed and buried under the ones that came after they went through those same effects, only for it to keep going. Their very bodies were breaking down, rotting before his eyes as a time effect mixed into the spell sped up the process as they died and merged into the dirt beneath them, with it continuing for each following member of their horde. Someone in the crowd began to cheer, and it wasn't long before it turned into a loud roar as thousands of voices joined, his own mixed among them. No matter how bad things looked, there was a future, and there was hope. Warriors made quick work of killing the few that had either gotten too far to feel the weapon's effects or else had been some combination of strong and fast enough to get out of the area before it could kill them, yet still leaving them all but crippled from the brief exposure to the effects. It was only the few flyers that came through that were immune to the damage taking place, but that's what the mages were for, as spells were shot off as fast as they could be, tearing through flesh and bringing them crashing to the ground, either within the weapon's range where they perished shortly after, or else to be killed while they were down by whoever was closest on hand and wanted the experience. Through it all, Ben did see brief moments of hesitation from people, moments that had cost some lives as they struggled with the sorrow, the system effect that made the demons equal to any person in their mind. But the feeling of war trumped it for many more as they pushed the feeling away or simply didn't notice it with all the battle would cost if it was lost, the psychological effects waiting for when they'd have their moment to truly reflect on what they'd been through and all they'd done. It was as the weapon's beam stopped that he couldn't help but admire its use in that regard too. He didn't know if Ibaru had accounted for it back when he'd been in the planning phase, but it put a healthy amount of distance between those using it and the deaths they'd caused, likely easing the mental strain they'd be under from the overwhelmingly violent act. Seeing it in action only made him want to examine it in even greater detail as his eyes pulled away just a second to look back at it, having to process what he was seeing. Panic. Ibaru and those working under him were rushing around the device with frantic faces. For what reason, Ben couldn't say. He was about to grab Falk to rush over, wanting to see if their time had come when a different sound pulled his eyes back to the battle. Screams, not in triumph as they had been only moments before, but instead filled with fear and pain as the ring of mana that had penetrated the earth slowly faded, letting demons through as people were forced to fight them in earnest, all while it finally snapped into place for Ben. The weapon wasn't meant to deactivate at all. When it had, he'd simply assumed the effect carried for a while, the same way Thera's earth healing spell would. But it clearly needed constant output, meaning something had gone horribly wrong. He understood that in the same moment as his teacher, and without a word he pulled his hand from Thera's grasp as he and the Yeti rushed over to the device, needing to know if there was anything they could do. Ibaru! Falk roared. Where do you need us? Ben didn't need to ask. The moment he was close enough he could see what had happened. As the one primarily responsible for Thera's equipment, it was something he'd probably seen more than any other person on the planet. The enchantments that made the device what it was were breaking one by one under whatever was giving it its power. It didn't make any sense. The amount the weapon required was already insane by all accounts. The idea that the power coursing through it wasn't just enough to get the job done, but so far above it that it could even cause that sort of damage meant it was astronomical. More power than he could imagine getting into a single tool, especially if the sphere he'd identified in its schematics really was what contained it all. He didn't understand what could possibly make the thing before him run without just destroying it, but he understood what he could do as he ran amongst the various enchanters who were rushing to fix everything they saw break and ran his hands along it, not fixing anything, instead putting his minds to making dozens of sacrificial enchantments at once, feeling his mana dip dangerously low as he put each one where he could to take the strain off of the tool. Enchanters yelled at him, but he didn't listen, simply doing what he had to while they kept working away, as they slowly realized one by one that whatever he was doing was keeping things from getting worse, giving them the leeway to fix what they needed to as his teacher joined him to do the same. Quick-thinking boy. I knew it would be a good idea to have you here. Ha, well, it looks like you absolutely needed me as an extra body. I'm willing to bet that you and I are the only ones here who know how to make these, meaning that we're entirely responsible for putting them together until anyone else can get the practice. This is going to be a long month. He felt like his fate was sealed for the foreseeable future as he watched ones he'd already made begin to break down. Even buffed, he could only regain his mana so fast, but Ibaru slipped in beside him, watching what Ben did with his mana sense as he began replicating it, showing the skill that left him as not only the head of the Craftsman's Guild but let him break through to be a magic smith. Like this? The troll asked as he laid them down, Ben looking over to judge the work. That will definitely work. I'd say you just need practice, but it looks like we'll all be getting plenty on that front. He laughed as he worked to replace everything he'd built up as they crumbled. Just what the hell do you have running this thing? Did you squeeze a star into here or something? Ha, should we live past the third wave then maybe I'll tell you. For now, can one of you two train the other enchanters on how to make these the moment you're free? I'll do it, Fox said, focusing on Ben as he did. You have more experience with these than I do, so you're more valuable here. Just call me if you need to switch out, alright? Better to get a 15-minute break than for you to fall into mana exhaustion for who knows how long. You got it, Fox. It was with those words the machine came back online, firing off its deadly ray to end everything that was in its path. But he didn't have time to appreciate whatever was happening. Everything he had was focused on enchanting, applying them again and again as some unseen person handed him a mana potion, watching as he downed it and threw away the bottle to let himself keep working. What was left of his headache was coming back in full force as he couldn't help but wish he had just a little more mana at his disposal. The only thing keeping them afloat being that he had Ibaru beside him. So just out of curiosity, how many other awakened enchanters do we have here? He wanted to know, with that detail being key in how they deal with things for the next month. Fox, yourself, and I. The rest of my team is 7th to 9th in level. Who knows though, maybe we'll get lucky, and this will be the push needed to get a few of them over the edge. God, we can hope. Okay, what that sounds like to me is that we're all on 18-hour shifts for the entire month. One of us will have to be on it at all times while your people are split to help us unless you have a better idea. Please have a better idea. Ha, unfortunately, it seems that our particular futures are sealed, and speaks volumes to the potential of expanding the use of this to every invasion point. If you modify the enchanting system you use, it should still be possible. The ring system I submitted a report on is incredibly stable, and it still shows most of its benefits when combined with other systems. Not that it helps now, but assuming we have a future, it's something to look into. I do remember seriously considering if I should have all of the enchantments we'd already worked on redone after reading your report. Unfortunately, it's a little too late for me to regret not doing so. The entire conversation was done through gritted teeth as they both worked, having no choice but to ignore the world around them in favor of devoting all they had to their work. Ben was the faster of the two, having multiple minds that could be used to create many enchantments at once, but Ibaru had a far greater mana pool, the man having built it up for years before his skill awakened and then continued to develop it further after. It meant that while Ben could act on the fly, he was constantly on the edge of mana exhaustion while Ibaru was more consistent in placing them. And this is just going to get worse. They were both buffed at the moment by the food they'd received, and Ben had downed a potion on top of it. But both would wear off sooner or later. It was enough to make him regret not taking a single one of the god potions he'd given Sonia, but it was too late for that now. All he could do was keep putting his all into it, spending every bit of mana as it regenerated if it meant keeping the world around him safe. Boy, take a break. I can keep going. Like hell you can. It's been hours and you're the only one who keeps refusing them. Because I don't need them. I'm excellent at regulating my mana output, so I'm not going to fall into mana exhaustion. Sure, but I'm not thinking of that. I'm looking at the mental strain you're going to be under. Which is also nothing, Fox. Don't you know how many minds your lovely apprentice has at his disposal? Not to mention how high my stamina is. I could do this for days. It was a lie, of course. Even with every mind in his head splitting the load, he still felt the strain of all of that work. Each skill he had that could help was being pushed to the limits as he refined his enchantments as much as he could in all of that time, shaving off fractions of a point of mana with everything he put down, all to get just a little more out of himself as he worked, all while he got everything there was to get out of the skills at his disposal. If he didn't give all he could, then people would die, plain and simple. He didn't want to stop no matter what sort of strain it put him under, and he was happy to deal with it. It was only as both his teacher and Ibaru both put powerful hands on his shoulders and pulled him away that he had no choice. "Hey Dash! Ben," Ibaru said firmly, cutting him off. "I cannot begin to express how I value the level of work and commitment you're showing, however. You need to be aware that you are a limited resource right now. It's only the three of us that have any sort of awakened enchanting, and you're better than I am at it. We can't have anything happen to you. I've already sent a runner to each army. We'll be shutting the machine down in 5 minutes for a 30-minute break. In that time, they'll all need to fight whatever comes through on their own. But it will allow us to place as many of your enchantments as we can on it to lighten the load, and it will allow you to rest. If I'm better at this than you, then I shouldn't be resting. I should be enchanting in that time too," he shot back. "You can't just depend on your workers when their skills aren't as good, and you can't act like more hands aren't better here, right? We already said it, we're gonna have to do some crazy shifts for the next month. This is just the first day of that for me." He wasn't gonna back down, they could see it in his eyes, so instead they opted to compromise. 15 minutes, his teacher told him firmly. "You'll enchant for 15 more minutes. Then you'll have a 20-minute break, or else I'm getting my niece to put you under a sleep spell for me. Pretty sure that won't actually work. It didn't last time, and I've only gotten more minds. But fine, I'll take the break." Even if he didn't want to, he couldn't actually deny his need for it. His head was pounding more and more, approaching the full-blown migraine he'd been feeling after his minds had split, while he pushed himself to do everything he could as the machine powered down, only stopping after another 5 minutes of applying the enchantment and getting the small bit of satisfaction that came with them not immediately breaking. A part of him wanted to go to Thera, but with the weapon down, she had her own role to play as bits of earth floated around her, being charged with mana before shooting off at speeds that left them invisible to the naked eye as they tore through swaths of demons, making their way through to the warriors on the ground. Even if she wasn't busy, though, he didn't think he could move. He hadn't realized just what sort of burden he'd been putting himself under with how much he'd been trying to do, and it was only after taking a few steps away that he had to keep himself from crashing to the ground, moving to get out of the way the best he could, just to let himself get a little rest as he stared out into the death and destruction going on around them. Each army was being pushed back in that short amount of time, that much was clear, yet the demons still hadn't broken through, even if it was an eventuality they were all aware of. The point of fighting them at the moment wasn't even truly to stop them. They knew that it would be impossible to keep everything from getting through, but to stop as many as they could so that the months after wouldn't be filled with cities, towns, and villages falling to attacks from roaming groups of them as they slowly got stronger before the next wave. His distance had plenty of benefits to go with it aside from the little bit of safety he got to enjoy, at least comparatively, when he looked at everyone who was fighting. He didn't need to see anyone die, not up close and personal, only grasping the fact that it was happening at all as he watched far-off figures fall to the ground while spells flew through the air in a constant barrage. He took his eyes away from it, not wanting what was happening to invade his thoughts when he needed to work, as he focused on his body, massaging his muscles to get some of the stiffness out of them in the time he had. "Hope all of you up there are doing your part, Myriad, 'cause if we're having this much trouble, I can only imagine what every other point is going through." He got no answer, not that he expected one, as he did his best to ignore the circumstances around him to give his mind and body what little rest he could. As much as he would have liked to, he didn't sleep. He couldn't afford to with everything happening, but he felt his mana return to full for the first time in hours as he let himself not think in that time, meditating and letting the world disappear the best he could, right up until he saw that same black beam shoot out, giving the warriors on the ground the leeway to get their injuries treated and move their dead, while at the same time it signaled his need to get back to work, standing up on shaky legs and rushing back over as Falk grumbled. "We were hoping you'd have a nap or something. In this racket? No way. Anyway, how are things looking?" "Nothing broke through in that time," Ibaru told him positively. "The soldiers are holding the line well enough for now. We've also got the others who haven't gotten the knack for the enchantment yet, at least working to keep the ones we're making from breaking. It shows." He immediately felt more leeway than he had before, not needing to push quite as hard to ensure everything that was there was maintained. He was even confident that he could add more enchantments with the extra energy they had. giving them that tiny bit of wiggle room if things went wrong, and got to work doing exactly that, with neither Falk nor Ibaru stopping him as the latter spoke up. "I believe we need to discuss how we'll be doing this," the guild head began, talking being slightly easier for everyone as they felt their workload decrease. "Ben is right, of course. It looks like we'll all need to split the load. If we do 18-hour shifts each, then that will keep 2 of us on at any given time, which should be enough to ensure nothing goes wrong, and as my people get more skilled at the enchantment, then it should lessen the load just a little. 18 hours a day of constant enchanting." It wasn't like he'd never worked himself to the bone like that in the past, but doing it for a straight month was asking a lot. All of them were going to burn out in that time, and the buffs they were under would vanish in a matter of days, making things even harder for them. Still, what choice did they have? Ibaru was able to pick up on the sheer unreasonableness of the suggestion himself as he continued. "I'm sorry. I asked you both to be here to act as a reserve in case of an emergency. Yet now it seems I'll be working the 2 of you to the edge of death." Falk could only laugh. "Infinite hells, what else can we do? Who knows? Maybe this will be the push I need anyway." He said it with a forced smile, Ben putting on his own in return. "But maybe see if there's a free awakened light mage anywhere to give us some buffs, yeah? And pay us well for our work after, 'cause I'm not cheap." "Ha, I believe you're already both quite well off, but after this, I'll make sure you get a sum that would leave an average citizen never needing to work again if that was their desire. Not much point in hoarding wealth if everything comes to an end, is there? In that case, we better do our money's worth," Ben laughed. "Anyway, that means one of us needs to stop to rest. Ibaru, I vote you since I just got a break and Falk basically had one as he was teaching your people earlier." "I couldn't possibly," he argued. "I see how hard you're both working, and your break was already insufficient for what you've done, Ben. You need a real one." The boy isn't going to give in, Ibaru, and I don't entirely disagree with him. Even if you don't sleep, relax and handle other matters. When it's time for you to come back, I'll send him off next whether he likes it or not. Hey, after another 9 hours of this, I can say with certainty I'm going to like it. He was fairly sure he'd already done 10, but it was hard to be positive since he had no way of keeping track of the time and his minds were too devoted to other tasks to count out the seconds like he had for the gate opening. Ibaru wanted to argue it more, but seeing both teacher and apprentice standing firm, he eventually relented. "All right, I'll go see about finding an awakened light mage like you suggested. The odds of one being among any of the armies present are slim, but not impossible, and I believe we're showing enough value that they'd be fools not to accept. Worst to worst, though, I'll definitely get us a couple 9th-level ones. Be safe till I return, and Falk, if anything goes wrong, I leave you in charge." "You got it." With that, he ran off, leaving Ben alone with his teacher and all of the other enchanters as they worked. "You know," Ben tried to joke through it all, "I was expecting this month to be hell, but it looks like hell is worse than I thought. If you need to take 10 at all, boy, I can hold up in that time. I'd say the same for you. Don't think just because I have less mana doesn't mean you can't take a breather. I do get nearly a point of it back every second now." "Ha! You don't have to tell me how ridiculous your Regan is. I just don't want my niece complaining when you look like a wrung-out rag by the end of this. Hey, just you wait. I'm going to use this experience to get another level or 2 of enchanting in the month. I can only imagine all of the job experience flooding in too. Just watch, Falk. If I need to put up with this for the 2nd and 3rd wave as well, then I'm hitting the 3rd tier and becoming a god of enchanting. Actually, what do you think divine enchanting would turn into if it gets to the 3rd tier? It already has the word divine in it. Super divine enchanting? Mega super divine enchanting? The possibilities are endless." They were both bantering as a distraction, nothing more. Ben had the leeway for it with his minds, while his teacher had the decades of experience behind him to put together his enchantments without much thought, and they both only wanted to keep from thinking just what they'd have to do. Forget just a light mage. If they really were going to do 18-hour days for a month, then they were going to need a life mage on them as well, along with a constant supply of potions and maybe even a good dark mage to help with some of the mental strain. I mean, worst to worst, we have Thera standing by for 2 of those things, but then mine-type dark spells don't seem to really affect me. Looks like I'll be doing a lot of gritting my teeth and bearing it for the foreseeable future. As the next few hours passed, the 2 of them were still working in full force, even as the sky grew dark. Everything that had gotten through during their 30-minute break earlier had since been slaughtered, leaving the armies around to handle the comparatively smaller number that had been able to push through the effects in a far less dangerous battle. While Ben focused on his own fight against himself. They were keeping up, ensuring everything that broke could be replaced, but it was a mental battle against how much he could take. The headache he'd felt growing the entire time had changed to a full-blown migraine, being experienced with all 32 minds he had, but he pushed through the pain for the few more hours he would need to wait. The moment it was time for his break, he had no intention of making it back to the city. He was finding a comparatively quiet spot on the ground to sleep like a corpse. He cast the smallest look beside him, finding Falk holding up a bit better than he was since the Yeti had gotten to spend a couple hours earlier training the other enchanters on just what to do to keep everything running, and that was enough to make a decision as he spoke up. Falk, I'll take 10 if you take 10 right after. I don't need it, boy, you go and have a break. Get a drink or something. If you don't need it, then I don't either. Ah, you damnable. Fine, I'll take a small break after you do. In that case, bring me some water back with you, so I can enjoy my time and not need to grab it myself. You got it? He said with a weary smile as for the first time in ages, he took his hand from the weapon and stepped away, rubbing some life back into his stiff arms as he did. The first thing he did was what his teacher asked of him, going to a supply of food and drinks for them to take as he scarfed down a piece of fruit and grabbed 2 cups of water, drinking his immediately and holding on to the other for Falk as he walked over to where Thera and Sonia were standing, looking into the battlefield. How's it look right now? Thanks to you both, shockingly good, Sonia told him as she glanced his way, giving a strained look. I can't help but feel guilty that if this keeps up I won't have anything to do. Ha! Consider that a good thing, having things to do is super overrated. And are you holding up okay, Ben? Thera asked him as she took his face in her hands, seeing the strain his brain was under and running all of the life spells she could through him to help. You've all been at that for hours. How much longer do you need to go? 2/3 of each day for the rest of the first wave, he told them, seeing the shock and horror in their eyes. All they knew was that he was helping to keep the weapon running. They hadn't known what an investment it would end up being. Looks like it's a good thing I came, right? Ben Dash. It has to be done, he told them. Better to suffer for a month and live, right? I'll be fine. It looked like they both wanted to say more but couldn't. He was right. The weapon was saving so many lives by being active and slaughtering an uncountable number of demons trying to make their way through. Even if it pushed him to the edge, he could be healed. By keeping it running, he was doing too much good to stop, no matter how hard it was. So with nothing to say, they stood in silence for the last bit of his break. Thera slipping her free hand into Ben's own as she worked to shoot down any of the winged demons that came out as he just watched all of the senseless deaths as the demons rushed through to meet their end, with him about to turn away to go back until something small caught his eye. Another demon, bipedal and vaguely in the shape of a human, standing within the zone of the weapon's attack, not dying, not breaking down, simply looking around as Ben felt a shiver go down his spine. He wasn't the only one to notice it either. Even if warriors on the ground couldn't reach it to attack without falling victim to the same weapon that had been keeping them safe as the hours rolled by, the mages could, and many of them fired off spells as beams of fire and raw mana, along with plenty of earthen bullets were shot its way, only for all of them to vanish or collapse to the ground with a wave of the creature's arm as it looked around, eventually focusing on where the zone of death it stood within was coming from, the very weapon he and the others stood so close to, as it reached out a hand to act. The moment it did, the very earth around it reacted, ripping from the ground and shooting at them, Thera trying to stop it with all of the power at her disposal while Ben screamed out for Falk and the other enchanters to run, knowing that despite her power, Thera's attempt would fail. If she'd gone for a barrier of stone it would have been one thing, but in the split second there was to act. He was one of the few that instantly grasped what the way the creature had defended itself signified. Magic nullification. The stones, loaded with the creature's power, ripped through the mana she'd reached out with as Falk and the other enchanters were slow to move, too invested in their work to pay attention to the world around them as the boulders rained down, smashing the weapon that had acted as a source of hope and throwing all who stood around it to the side as the ground under them exploded from the force. Ben didn't notice the creature who'd made such a thing possible go back through the gate where it had come. Nor did he pay attention to the unimpeded flood of demons that were no longer being held back. His eyes were only on the Yeti lying broken on the ground as he, Thera, and Sonia rushed to his side. There was nothing he could personally do to help, so he stood out of the way and let the two women work, their healing magics being pushed to their limits for the person they cared so dearly about, as Thera let out a relieved sigh despite the chaos around them. He won't die, but this isn't going to be quick, and it looks like there's a lot of people to treat now. Auntie, keep looking after him and I'll gather the others. And with that plan formed, she rushed off, going up to the many other enchanters laying on the ground to give whatever emergency medical treatment she could before raising the very earth beneath them all to move together to continue, as Ben alone was left useless. With the weapon destroyed, there was nothing he could do. His part to play was finished, replaced with the screams of dying soldiers that filled the air from the onslaught coming for them as he clenched his fist in impotent rage. Even if it would have been a miserable experience, a month of burning himself out would have been infinitely better than the nothing there was for him now, as all he could do was stand by and hope that those he loved who'd have to fight wouldn't die. No, there was one option, as Thera and Sonia had their hands full while armies had to fight in earnest. He instead turned his head to look at the pile of wreckage so close by. Powerless? He still had all of his skills at his disposal along with all of the information in his head. Resources? There was a pile of them there waiting for the taking, with his material magic primed to shape them into whatever form he could. He may have been lacking in rings for options, but he had the 11 that were ever present on his fingers, along with everything in his status. All he had to do was figure out how to combine them all into something that could be put to use, and with that resolve firmly in place he ran to it, digging through what he could see as fast as he could, gathering the bits that were clearly magic materials like mana crystals and mithril as he examined the parts that had made it through relatively unscathed, pushing his minds for any way they could be put to use as he found himself with one single piece of hope. A metallic sphere, no bigger than a soccer ball that had survived the attack undamaged, its construction built to ensure it could handle such things for whatever it contained. The mysterious power source that managed to not only let such a weapon exist, but to even start to break it in its might. Okay, this is actually something, he muttered to himself. This is options. If I can just put it to use, then I should be able to build something that could do an insane amount of damage. Let's see if I can build something that would collapse space like my space bombs would. Only using all of the power this thing has and drop it in the front of the gate, then even if it doesn't kill as many as it did before, I could probably get tens of thousands of them, since nothing would be able to get close to stop it. Unless that one comes back. Or it breaks under the pressure it would exert like my bombs did. And then if it does, I don't even know what will happen because I don't even know what this stupid thing is. Damn! He rolled it around in his hands, trying to understand it in all of the detail he could. The thing was positively coded in non-affinity enchantments, many that were clearly to keep it from breaking, but even more he couldn't begin to guess the purpose of. Other than that, there was the only noticeable feature to it as well. The entire thing was a smooth, metallic surface except for a circle on it the size of his palm, what he had to assume was its output. So if I link everything to that, then it should work, but I still don't know what this is or what could go wrong. With all of the power it has in it, if I break it, then for all I know I'm going to blow up everyone here. I need more information. He desperately wished Ibaru was there. Even if the man wanted to keep the power source a secret, he would have beaten the information out of him if need be. But as he looked around, the troll was nowhere to be seen. All there was the sight of armies being pushed back under the tide, and in one area collapsing altogether, letting the demons break through, into the world beyond where they'd be able to cause unending harm even after the gate closed. A scene that was sure to be taking place across all of the invasion points by that time. He didn't have the time to find Ibaru or hope that he'd show up, so he did the only thing he could, connecting to it, feeling each and every enchantment it had to try and understand them beyond just the list he could see in his head, trying to process everything that was there to get even a clue of just what was in his hands, only to feel something else, something deeper scratching at the edge of his consciousness as he dove in further, feeling his mana burn in a way it never would when he practiced the skill as he used it to power it, needing to know the mystery the tool held if he wanted any chance of putting it to use. All of his minds were on the task, each one pushing farther until there was nowhere else to go. Everything snapped into place as Ben's mind didn't strengthen or split, but was instead torn to shreds, everything he was breaking down and being destroyed with it as the sounds of notifications and screeches of pain filled his last bit of consciousness before nothing on the surface layer of who he was remained.